My name is Patrick Gordon, and I will be the chairman for the session 1. I'm going to ask the Vice President of the Quantity Surveyors Association, Mr. Markland Gordon, to come and pray for us. Mr. Gordon.
Shall we bow our heads of prayer? Almighty God, we thank Thee that You have allowed us to be alive today. We thank You, O Lord, that as we come to this seminar, that it will redound to the benefit of our country, and that we will see the results of effective contract administration as we go forth. We ask, O Lord, that as everything be done, it will be done to Your name's honor and glory. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you very much, Markland. Let me first of all apologize for the late start, and I'm not going to blame it on anybody, but I'll take the blame for that. We want to get right off moving with this seminar theme that we think is so very vital at this time. And therefore, I'm going to ask the Honorable Omar Davies, the Minister of Transport Works, Housing since January 2012, and also tell you that Dr. Davies served as Minister of Finance and Planning from December 1993 to August 2007. Was a senior lecturer in the Department of Economics at the University of the West Indies, 1991 to 1989, 81 to 89, and later was the Director General of the Planning Institute of Jamaica, PIOJ. He's a graduate of the University of the West Indies and Northwestern University in the USA. He has a doctorate in economics. He was an assistant professor at an Ivy League institution, Stanford University, out in California. Therefore, I ask our Minister, the Honorable Omar Davies, to present his greetings and to declare open our Seminar 2015. Dr. Davies.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gordon. Members of the platform, ladies and gentlemen, practitioners, students, let me begin by embarrassing my good friend, your president, Carver Stewart, who was moved up a notch in life from us ordinary people. As Carvel, as you know, was honored in the most recent National Honors List. Can't puzzle out whether it's for construction or for Harborview, but whatever it is, I think, yes, commendation is due. And since I'm doing commendations, let me commend the IMAJ for this annual seminar. It is very important for organizations such as the IMAJ to meet on a regular basis in order to keep abreast, to discuss issues of importance and relevance to your area of involvement, but also to just to utilize best practices to influence progress in the sector. I'm here in dual capacities. I'm here as the minister which has of the ministry which has responsibility for the government's involvement in the construction sector. But I'm also here in a capacity not very well known, in that I chair the Infrastructure Committee of Cabinet, which deals with all government contracts, not just construction contracts, but all government contracts, and any improvement you have noted in recent years, we take credit for it. And anything which hasn't gone right, I have a list of persons who I'll assign that blame to. But I say that not just facetiously, but because of that job, and we have taken it very seriously, both in terms of streamlining the government's own involvement in the contract process. But it has also given me, or given us all, a chance to look at some of the real problems and obstacles which face the practitioners in the area. In fact, the government is, I would say without fear of contradiction, the biggest client in the construction sector. And in a sense, almost it's the de facto regulator of the sector. And from the 3.5 going 4 years that I've chaired the infrastructure committee of cabinet, several of the issues which have come to light in terms of our probings, I suspect you will be from a more sophisticated and learned perspective discussing them in this seminar. So I'm going to hazard as a layman some of the issues which we have noted as being factors in efficient contract implementation of a contract. All of the issues are not necessarily the ones which would impact on the construction sector, but I've found that there is a common theme running through several of the areas of contracting, whether it's for services or it's for a construction contract. And perhaps the foremost, which we have discovered, is inadequate preparatory planning. Many persons put out advertisements for many government departments, that is, and I have no doubt that perhaps the same holds for non-government institutions. Put out invitation for bids with inadequate preparatory planning, and the winner of the bid often finds himself or herself involved in doing work which should have been done in advance. And many of the delays which you see in project implementation result from that. From the government's perspective, a second point is the uncertainty of financing, either whether the total sum is committed or whether the cash flow is available. And many delays are often encountered when a government entity, unless it has the full sum lodged in the bank, won't give the go-ahead to proceed. And hence, such an approach, and I'm not taking sides here, I can understand the rationale for the entity to take a position like that. But the end result is that there is a delay again. And if the combination of one and two, the inadequate preparatory planning and the uncertainty of financing, when you take that combination, it's a deadly combination leading to delays, further delays. A third area relates to inadequate project management. And in many government contracts, the person who has been assigned the task of managing that project throughout, either through inadequate training or inadequate experience, that again represents a major issue. And regardless of what the contract document states, if that is missing, then you're faced usually with further delays. And I'm not going to take all the blame on the side of the client, the government. There's also the reality of unreliability of some contractors. There are contractors who are most adept at winning a contract and slightly less adept in terms of actually implementing the contract. I think that there has been an improvement in recent years in terms of our being the challenges facing contractors being brought to our attention on us trying to do that. In particular, we believe that through the work of the National Contracts Commission, there has been an improvement where practitioners in the field are advising the government in this regard. I think we certainly haven't solved all the challenges, but I think there has been an improvement in terms of our interface between the contractors and the government as a client. And I believe that the result of the increased collaboration has spilled over. There are, however, and if I may, I would like to raise with you some issues which are emerging, and there are mutterings about them, but I believe that we need to face them frontally. And I think at some stage in our discussion, we need to have some views, not in terms of Lord God, we're dead now, that everything has come to an end, but rather how do we face this challenge? One relates to the fiscal challenges facing the government, which, as I said, is the biggest construction client in the country. I noted a recent discussion. Interestingly, nobody asked my view about infrastructure in the country. And it is a fact that one of the insensitivities of the multilaterals in terms of prescribing fiscal restraint is that in that process, inevitably, infrastructure and the maintenance of infrastructure suffer. Inevitably, and it's not just a Jamaican phenomenon. And the challenge is that in that period when inadequate sums are being expended in the maintenance of infrastructure, when eventually you're close to collapse, the investment needed to either replace or repair the infrastructure is perhaps much more than it would have been had you been maintaining. And that is one of the side effects of being tied into an agreement. And this is not a criticism of the agreement, but I think there's a need for us as a country, and this sector in particular, to discuss the negative impact of restricting expenditure on maintenance over an extended period. Because down the long run, it's not just when we know the life of an infrastructure investment. Neglect of maintenance inevitably means that replacement cost or that huge refurbishment cost is going to come back down the road to haunt you. That's one. The second thing is, and I know that Carvel has very strong views on this, relates to the use of foreign contractors. And I'm going to twin that with the issue of the development of a cadre of Jamaican professionals. And I'm very pleased to see the number of young people here. I presume that there are students who are hoping to pursue professions within the building trade. In terms of the use of foreign contractors, let me separate. One is government, and the second is the private sector. As regards the government, to the extent that the financing for projects is from a foreign institution, whether a country or a foreign bank or foreign development bank, almost invariably their requirement is that there should be no restriction to national contractors as those who can bid for the project. That's a reality, and the tenders are supposedly open to any entity which is registered by that bank or by that foreign country. In some instances, the foreign country says our contractors should have first choice because it's their money which is being loaned. That places us in a situation, either you don't take the loan or you take the loan in on the conditions which are associated. It's something which we need to discuss. What to the extent should we accept such loans, which is not that they preclude local contractors, but they open the door to foreign contractors, and then several issues then arise. If a foreign contractor wins it, should there be restrictions on the number of foreign professionals they are allowed to bring in? And if so, at what level should these restrictions stop? I'm throwing this up because I know it's an issue. The same problem arises, but it's a little bit more complex when the investor is, the client is not the government, but a private entity. If a private Jamaican entity chooses to invite international bids, what restrictions, either through negotiated agreement or through imposition, should be placed? And then on the private, what happens if the investor is a foreign investor who then says, I need to bring a certain number of foreign professionals in? These are questions which I think we need to examine. And we need to examine them, one, in the context of seeking to develop in our nation state a set of professionals who are capable of carrying out these projects. But at the same time, which we need to examine within the context of what we term loosely as free trade, whereby if you're open to foreign investments, what are the conditions which you can apply in terms of limiting or guiding, that's a better term, those foreign investors to the use of Jamaican professionals? So these are issues which I think there's need for us to have a sit down, a frank sit down to discuss. In that discussion, and it's something which I feel that we are perhaps need to be more forthright in analyzing and discussing, is the issue of productivity levels. Is it that Jamaican worker at whatever level, and when I say worker, I don't necessarily mean a mason or a carpenter or engineer or whatever, is it that we are not meeting the productivity test? Is it that the other nationalities, other companies are able to systematically be more productive? These are issues which we need to analyze and come to some conclusion. The conclusion is that if we can show differential in productivity levels, the answer, that's not the end of the question. The question is, what then do we need to do, either in our training or educational institutions or in our practice, to systematically raise our productivity levels? But I would invite the IMAJ at some stage, and we need to engage in a discussion on these issues, not in a confrontational way, but rather to us to say, what is the state of affairs, and how then do we improve in our productivity levels or efficiency levels? Because in the final analysis, what every client is seeking is the best result at the most competitive price. And that's if we take that as a given, I believe that we are in a position to move forward in this discussion, this analysis, and this remedial steps which we can take to improve the profession. I do not know how many of those issues will be touched on during these discussions, but when I've looked at the program, it is an interesting program, and I always feel that if I got adequate notice, I should just carve out a day or two to sit in on these discussions, to listen to them. It's imperative that we go beyond our narrow confines of our profession to understand the place of this sector in the overall economy. And the same issues which face the rest of the economy in terms of competition, in terms of international competition, will be facing, is facing this sector. And so I encourage you to open your minds to these discussions. On that note, I don't know if this is the appropriate time, but I take pleasure in declaring open this symposium. Thank you very much.
The next speaker is no other than our President, Mr. Carvel Stewart. He is presently the General Manager of Crossings Construction Limited. He has been the Chairman of the Harborview Football Club since 1992, and as I mentioned, has been our President since 2013. I looked through his bio, and I think it is fair to say that Carvel has worked on or consulted on almost every building built in Jamaica. I now invite Mr. Carvel Stewart, our President, to bring greetings to the seminar. Mr. Carvel Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Master of Ceremonies. Dr. Honorable Omar Davies, Minister of Transport, Works and Housing. Mr. Raymond McIntyre, who is currently, well, his capacity here today is as a contract administrator, but I refer to him mostly as the chairman of the National Contracts Committee. Mr. Donald Mullings, who is another presenter this morning, and he's also the managing director of M&M Jamaica Limited. Mr. David Garrell, our first vice president and chairman of the seminar committee. Other members of the IMAJ Council, members and associate members, students, members of the media, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good morning. And welcome to the seminar. Your program states that I bring you greetings, which translated means that, and I believe the chairman did this, that I am to be brief, to make way for more important people. I will obey. Again, welcome to the 2015 IMAJ seminar. The theme speaks for itself. We are always concerned that contractors are cognizant of the details of the agreement they have entered into, so that they execute their responsibilities smoothly and efficiently to the satisfaction of all. Of course, they should make some money. If not, the current job could be their last. Today, we're offering the combined expertise of some of the most experienced professionals in the industry in these matters. We felt it important to bring to the public at large the nature of the contracts under which construction works are executed and the possibilities for both harmonious execution as well as the potentials for conflicts. I commend the current students here from the various institutions as well as those of us who are still learning these matters for your attendance here today. Please take notes of the proceedings. I believe it will be worthwhile education. Briefly, I am unhappy with the current state of the local members of our noble profession, and I thank Dr. Davies for pointing out some of the issues that prevail. In this, I include all our skills, the architects, engineers, conservators, contractors, skilled and unskilled labor. I, however, look forward to future possibilities with hope that growth will soon impact our construction industry, which, after all, is said to be the engine of growth. I must again thank Dr. Davies, who continues to grace us with his presence and his delivery at these seminars. As you may know, there are other occasions in another sphere where we are not always this cordial. That only lasts for 90 minutes at a time, of course. I want to thank David and the committee for again putting on what is clearly another successful event, and continue hoping that he will, as much as I've been called the permanent chairman of Harborview Football Club, he might take up the chairmanship permanently. Thank you all for coming. Enjoy today's offerings, and please, especially our students, learn from the proceedings. Thank you.
I want to acknowledge our sponsors. Without them, this seminar could not be put on. And from year to year, they come on board with the IMAJ, and we're very, very thankful for them. We're very proud of them. And I'm going to just read the list to you so that you can know that in your business, in your movements around, in all of your transactions, we're asked that you support the people that support us. We're talking about Jamaica National, General Paving and Asphaltic Concrete Enterprise, CEMEX Jamaica, Sesco Group of Companies, Delta Supplies, BNB University, Toyota Jamaica, CARE International and Jamaica Limited, ATL, Paramount Traders, Sunlight Windows and Doors, the Heart Trust Apprenticeship Board, Guardian Life, and Matalon Roofing, who is a first-time sponsor for this seminar. I know that they've recently launched their product, and I'd invite all of the stakeholders in the construction industry to take a look at the exhibit that they have outside when we have the break. Thanks to all our sponsors. We can't do it without them, and I'd like for you to give them a round of applause, please. Okay, we now get into the meat of the matter with the effective contract administration, the contractor's perspective, and I cannot think of a Jamaican contractor that's best able, best experienced, best qualified to speak to us on this matter than my friend, the managing director of M&M Jamaica Limited, and a past president of the IMAJ, I think 3 times? Or was it 2? 2. Okay, maybe I'm forecasting. Mr. Don Mullins, please come and address us on the topic of the effective contract administration, the contractor's perspective. Mr. Don Mullins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I once heard a story, and it concerned this sleaze, I think we end up calling him, but he was in court, and his attorney jumped up to address the judge, and the judge, he said to the judge, Your Honor, look at my client. He's such an innocent man. He does not beat his wife. He goes to bed on time at night. He does not bribe the police. He obeys all the laws. Halfway through the presentation, Sleaze jumped up and said, Your Honor, it is just not fair. Look at how much money I'm paying this man, and he come here to speak about somebody else. Mr. Chairman, I thank you for your very kind introduction. Mr. President, fellow presenters, participants, good morning. Let me begin by, first of all, commending the master builders, as the minister did, for another annual seminar. I think we'll all agree it is very important for us not just to educate, but to communicate. In fact, at least once a year, we just gather here and we talk. I was hoping that the minister would be here, because construction is really no different from any other sector. It's no different from football or cricket or manufacturing or politics. The more you do, the better you become. Master builders' growth remains the same year after year. Unless local contractors get the chance of participating in local projects, of practicing and practicing and practicing, we will remain the same. That's the contention we have. And we know the requirements of the World Bank and the financial agencies. But when you take a pre-qualification documents, Mr. Chairman of NCC, that says to build a building at the airport, Norman Manley Airport, you must have built a building at an airport before. When we only build 1 or 2 airports, then you know that Jamaicans don't stand a chance. Today, as you have seen, I'm presenting an effective contract administration, the key to successful construction project. And I'm going to ask Marlon to go to the first slide. I want to give you a little on the construction sector, and I will do my best to finish within the allotted time. But this is one of the largest segments of business, not only in Jamaica, but in the entire world. Construction in Jamaica over the last 10 years or so, this expenditure average about $1 billion US. It is one of the greatest contributors to the country's GDP, I think approximately 9%, and employs from 2005 to now, and I think 85,000 up to 110,000. 2005 to 06, that figure was about 115,000, 120,000. Today, it is about 85,000. It is the realization phase of the civil engineering process following conception and design. And it is the role of the contractor, our role, turn the ideas of the owner, the planner, and the designer into physical reality. And as we note in recent times, in fact, in my time, go back 30, 40 years ago, you had some little small projects, but today construction projects are now becoming larger and larger. Highway 2000, North-South Link, and other projects, and more complex and time-consuming, requiring the interaction of the many different persons to accomplish. All projects must be completed in accordance with specific plans and specifications and other construction restrictions such as soil type, weather conditions, human resource factor, and of course you have to deal with your local friendly and sometimes unfriendly politicians. In manufacturing, as is so different from construction, you bring things to a factory and you fence the site, a 12-foot, 20-foot fence, and place 2 security guards at the entrance to the site. Not so for construction. You might be working on a 20-mile stretch of road or a 300-acre infrastructure development in Longville. We have to deal with it. It is this diversity that makes the preparation and implementation of the civil engineering projects so interesting and so challenging. Despite all of this, it is our duty to predict and manage the possible situations that may be encountered and to develop contingency strategies accordingly. Essential, at the bottom of the slide, essential to all of this is effective administration of the contract. So let's now look at what is contract administration. It is the monitoring and enforcement of the terms of the contract. And this involves numerous daily decisions that are based on interpretation of the contract document. And frankly, you have to take contract administration from 2 perspectives. The client perspective. Client contract administrator usually coordinates the activities of the consultant and the contractors, approval agencies, and of course communicate with the client. The contractor administrator, usually the project manager. And I'll touch a little bit on what both roles are. The contract administration generally include invitation and processing of tenders. That's usually what the client contract administrator does. Preparation of contract documents. Seeking instruction from the client in relation to the project. Issuing instructions such as variations, use of prime cost sums, etc. Evaluation of claims, preparation of progress reports, reporting to the client, issuing payment certificates, and completion certificates. What then are the goals of contract administration? And regardless of the size or complexity of the project, the objective is the same on both sides. Cost to complete the project within the budget. Time to complete the project within the contract period. Quality to perform all work meeting or exceeding the specifications. Safety, complete the project with zero accident and conflict. Complete the project with zero dispute. From the contractor's side, cost engineering and proper costing remains one of the most important functions in any project implementation. The contractor's involvement really starts at tender stage. And no matter how well managed and how well organized and how qualified that manager is, it will be difficult to have a smooth operation, as it will affect the supply of the resources. He will simply not be able to provide the resources to do the job properly. And these resources, of course, material, suitable equipment, and properly qualified and experienced staff. Planning and scheduling for the contractor. This is another very important area for the construction process that is equally important in determining the success or failure of the project. Activities must be planned and directed to obtain optimum project performance. And this involves the logical analysis of the project, giving due consideration to the constraints and available resources. As I said before, material, equipment, human resources, weather consideration, financial consideration, and of course, the social and political situation. And that is particularly important, especially in Jamaica, of making adjustment to plans as time goes by. Other important consideration for the contractor is equipment planning and management. Main cost element in any contract is material, labor, equipment, and overheads. Equipment in civil engineering works range from, I would think, 20 to 60%. Hence, I think you can see the importance of proper selection of equipment and ensuring that the equipment produced properly. Knowing when, for example, to use an excavator instead of a D8 or a bulldozer. And a bulldozer working hard is not necessarily producing at an optimal level. And I want to tell you my own experience on the Negril to Montego Bay Highway. And the operator presently works for me. I had a whole series of bulldozer working, and I check what they do on a daily basis. At the end of the day, I check the Caterpillar manual, what it should produce. They were producing anything like 40 to 50% of what they should produce, but the guys were working very hard. I stayed there for a day, and what did I notice? The man goes to the bathroom, very simple, 5 minutes. 3 hours later, he goes to get some water, 5 more minutes. You add those 5 minutes when you have 20 bulldozers, each of them earning $8,000 per hour. So each time he goes and gets a glass of water, that's 12 into 8,000, whatever that is, 60, is it 60? 600? $600 every time he drinks water. Now, I've always, in talks with my fellow contractors and in my own office, try to explain to them the importance of. So what did I do? I simply called the operator. He works for me presently. And I said, listen to me, this is what the Caterpillar manufacturers say you should produce. What I will do, every month when I measure the work along with the standing consultant from a foreign, you will measure with me. And every time you make the Caterpillar target, I pay you 2 times what your boss pay you. It was rented machine. And he became one of the wealthiest operators because the machine suddenly produced as per the manufacturer specs. How do we achieve the above goals on a successful project? First, establish and implement the contract terms. And as I said, that generally is the role of the client contract coordinator. Because projects are considered successful when the work is done to the required specs, within the budget, within the agreed time frame, and of course, the contractors make fair returns for his effort. And I'm happy one of the major clients is here, and I'm sure he'll agree with me, Mr. Donald, that both sides to succeed must see what they're working for in a fair way. If these criteria are not achieved, one of the parties is likely to be dissatisfied and will lead to dispute. And I will speed up because I have to give you a couple of examples of these disputes. And success is unlikely when, one, the construction period is too short, and secondly, a very vexed issue, too low tender, Mr. Chairman of NCC, too low tender is accepted. Just can't fund the project. The contract administrator must therefore guide the client, Mr. Donald, in establishing realistic terms and contract conditions. Having established these terms, he must now enforce them in a fair and an impartial manner. I have to leave some of these judgments to you to decide whether we, the industry in Jamaica, operate in as fair a manner as it should be, and what leads to a lot of the conflicts that I will try and outline. The administrator must be aware of his responsibilities. Contract place responsibilities on the contractor's party. Good contract administration will ensure that the parties are aware of their obligations. The administrator must encourage each party to deal with problems expeditiously and resolve them as allowed in the contract. Communication. Good communication is essential in ensuring information is issued in a timely manner. This will allow work to proceed as programmed and minimize delays, minimize claims, etc. Timely communication will allow both sides to apply the most desirable method of overcoming related problems. Late communication is likely to result in time delays, additional costs, which in turn leads to wanting, claims, and dispute. Very important for the coordinator or the administrator to confront and resolve problems. Reluctance to confront problems often leads to more problems. Early attempts to deal with problems usually allow for alternate methods to be used to execute the work. We find consultants and contractors in Jamaica, and you might forgive me for being so blunt, is that time they try to ignore the problem or reject legitimate claims simply because they do not want to upset our very valued client. What you do find, however, that dispute will have to be resolved sooner or later. And it is much better to deal with them at an early stage so that problems can be least minimized. And I'm going to just briefly give you a couple because I don't want to run out of time before giving you some examples of very vexed contract issues because of what we believe are faulty contract administration. I think years ago, UDC attempted to build, I think, the Portmore Shopping Center. The company, I think, was Li Chang, having, I think, $15 million worth of work to complete the project. Project, I'm told, was terminated in a vexatious manner without due consideration. Client ended up paying $25 million on a project that required $15 million to complete. NWA versus YP Seaton in St. Mary. These are public projects. Vex issue, inadequate specs, $25 million over and above the bid. CDA versus UDC, claims still unresolved. It's presently in excess of 3 billion Jamaican dollars. And project presently in Mid-Clarendon, I think of all fairness to the contractor since it's still under discussion, inadequate specification, poor soil report, geotechnical information, claim of $150 million. And I want to tell you, 75% of all arbitration and adjudication claims in Jamaica, contractors end up winning. And presently there are several claims, several contractors versus the National Works Agency, and I hope some representative here, and China Harbor. And these claims, I'm told, is in excess of $2 billion. NWA versus Phil & Sons, Ocho Rios to Port Antonio Highway. 15 million US was paid to settle construction dispute. I could go on and on and on. I don't want to call the name because I would need permission from a lot of these clients and the contractors to give you the details of these claims. And as I said, some of these are still going on. But a very famous one was Bosong Engineering, from Negril to Montego Bay. That project started at since I was the local partner in the deal, that project started at 25 million US. Contract was terminated. It ended up costing $50 million. Due, in my own assessment, to faulty contract administration, faulty data to begin with. The earthworks moved from, I think, 500,000 cubic yard to something like 2 million cubic yard. The soil stabilization using geotextile end up costing, I think, another 20, 30 million over and above what was budgeted. Again, faulty information. So what then makes a good contract administrator? In order to achieve the above, the objective administrator must be competent, he must be resolute, he must be objective, and he must be a team player. He must be competent in order to gain the respect of those he deals with and discourage the abuse of authority and situation likely to lead to unnecessary dispute. He must be resolute to ensure the matters are dealt with as required by the contract. He must be objective, that within the contract parameters, the interests of both the contractor and the client are balanced. And this is the administrators appointed by the client. And finally, he must be a team player. For however good he is, and several clients that seem to find that out, he cannot achieve this task of completing the project without the cooperation of the contractor. Contract form is no substitute for good contract administration. And this is very important for us to understand. Because what we find happening in Jamaica as construction becomes larger and more complex, so does the potential for problems increase. Many clients, many clients, after problems have arisen, conclude that the contract conditions, the tried and proven contract conditions that has existed for 100 years are inadequate, and that additional conditions could have avoided these problems. Hence, more and more of our clients instruct their consultant to alter or add new conditions. And when you look at the contract, there's a section marked particular applications, hoping to tilt the scale in their favor. So what happened? You have extended payment period. One contract that we looked at, a 90-day contract, had the payment period as 56 days. 56 days. The client had up to 56 days in which to make payment on a contract. But clients just don't quite understand that they are the owner of the project and the contractor is a partner in the deal. So even when you finish, 3 months later, you're still trying to get paid. Reduce mobilization payment. I think the government recommended a 10% mobilization. There are government departments, are government-affiliated institutions that somehow changed that to 5% because they figure the contractors perhaps getting too rich, too fast, and have to slow them down. This exists as we speak. A very vexed issue, exclusion of contractors, or I don't want to call it intimidation of contractors. The exclusion of contractors should they threaten legal action to resolve thorny issues. I just thought that was the fairest way to deal with contract. If you can't resolve it sitting on a table, you go to the courts, and we should have. But suddenly you find that you can't bid again with these agencies because you have decided to take the matter to court. Of course, it's better than an OK Carroll citation. Ridiculous interest payment for late honoring of payment claims. These are just some of the issues, some of the points used by the client in moving away. Well, you know why I'm searched here. My documentation as presented to me by my team. Miss this one. But what we find, regardless of how we operate, altering the contract terms can only lead to more problems of adjudication, more problem of arbitration. And as I said earlier, 75% of all adjudication claims in Jamaica, the contractors end up being the winner. Next slide, please. Okay. In concluding, good and effective contract administration is essential to the success of construction project. It should serve to ensure that both the client and the contractor understand and uphold the contract, that information is communicated effectively, and that potential problems are dealt with. A good contract administrators present will be felt by the team as a supportive, and I want to stress supportive. And I don't want to put two vexed issues on the table, but there are so many, to make this presentation today, I randomly called 3 very respected construction firms. And they could go through, they said, listen, if you work with consultant X, expect problems. From day one. So from day one, the contractor is aware, and the first thing he starts to do is to defend himself by looking at ways to make claims to defend himself. If there's an error in the design, the consultant will find a way to put it on your desk. So you simply, that's 3 firms. And 50% of all of those projects run by some companies in Jamaica end up in adjudication. Simple matters that can be dealt with. So a good contract administrator as present will be felt by the team as a supportive and driving force in meeting the contract goals. Similarly, a poor contract administrator will more than likely negatively impact the project outcomes and result in additional costs to both the contractor and the client. And before I give you one more story, and this is very current. These are public institutions that we are dealing with. 10 years ago, and I won't name the institution, there was a project somewhere in eastern Jamaica where the contractor made a claim. I think the claim was for 20 million. The client ended up paying off the order of 25 to 30 million of a 20 million claim. Contractor later on put in a bill for $1 billion. 700 million was recommended by the adjudicator. Of course, the client protests. It goes to the local Supreme Court. I think the contractor won. Then it ended up with the Privy Council, and the client ended up winning. What happened in this case? Poor contract administration. They both lost because they both end up paying the Privy Council way in excess of the 20 million, where if there was a good, experienced contract administrator, you would have resolved the thing on a month-by-month basis. Project claims must be dealt with on a timely basis and in accordance with the terms of the contract. I think my time is up, Mr. Chairman. 2 minutes. It says 2 minutes, so I just want to use the 2 minutes to bring a couple more points that we find very troublesome for contractors. Inadequate design, poor geotechnical information, and I can give you 2 quick examples. Project in Mid-Clarendon. What does the spec say? What does the contract say? Soft rock easily removed by a DA tractor. If you get to that site and you have to blast, and a D9 can't do the work, you have to bring in a D10. I just believe you sit with the contractor and hammer out a price. But you end up going to arbitration and you end up paying $275 million more. Another point, most of us bid, what does the document say? And I can tell you a project, Negril, Norman Manley Boulevard. The document says no rock, the borehole, it says no rock, and the work will be done above the water table level. You go on site, the first day, you're in water. What does the consultant say? They say it might have said that, but a good contractor should have known that you can't work in Negril and there's no water. But it's other one, fine print is there. The contractor must check the accuracy of the drawing. So what does the document say? It says 350 square meter of floor area. That's what it says. You go to implement the job, it's 350 meter square area, but the drawing that you saw says 6-inch slab. But there's another drawing which was intended drawing that says 8-inch slab. What does the client say? The client say it is your responsibility that you should have checked the drawing and point out the error. But you only have 3 weeks to bid. And the other drawing about the geotechnical information, it says the contractor must verify the soil condition. How do you verify the soil condition on a site that is 300 acres in 2 to 3 weeks? Not possible. And before I say, Mr. President, and I want to discussion on it. Inadequate drawings. We have sent teams, my own company, I can use my example, and I know companies here, to St. Lucia, to Dominica, to Trinidad. And you pick up a set of documents, and what do? You go build the thing. Projects, this is in my office, 165 million. 90 million of that 165 is provisional. The clients must understand the responsibility of the contractor. We build to instruction. They must insist that the other side, their coordinating team, produce to make sure that there can be an efficient construction sector. Road project in Jamaica. You're going to do a 10-mile road. The clients forget to put in the leveling course. What happened? The contractor is worried about his reputation, so what the contractor do is say, listen, I prefer to lose than to hear that I mess up a road. And contractors put in the thing at the moment. We have to understand the role of the contractor and the role of the client. Contractors built to instruction. So I hope we talked a little. We can talk later on during the question and answer period. I just want to thank you for your very kind attention, and let's move in the future as a united team. I thank you.
Thank you very much, the Don Mullins. Our next presenter presents the consultant's perspective on contract administration. He's a registered architect. He is the managing director of APEC Consultants Limited. He's a fellow of the Jamaican Institute of Architects. He was formerly chairman and is currently a member of the Architects Registration Board. He was one of the first commissioners appointed when the NCC was established. He served for 7 years between 1999 and 2006. He has since been recalled to the NCC since 2010 and is currently serving as that body's chairman. He attended Sheffield University, where he gained a Bachelor of Architecture, Bachelor's in Architecture and a Master of Arts. I could have foregone all the foregoing that I've said to you and just simply say to you, he's a graduate of Jamaica College. And that would have sufficed. Mr. Raymond McIntyre, please address us.
First of all, let me just say good morning to everyone here. I'm glad that the house is full because I think it will be a very productive seminar. Chairman, President, greetings to you and also to the other presenters. At the outset, I'd like to make two apologies. First one is I don't have a PowerPoint presentation, not having had the time to actually create one, or perhaps the resources in terms of staff. The second apology is in respect of the overlap with the previous presenter, what I'm about to present, as well as the potential overlap with the successive presenter in this regard. In fact, in the first instance, I really thought that somehow my manuscript had gotten into Don's hands, you know. Anyway, this is no surprise, because I believe eventually we all have the same objective, and the solutions for achieving that objective, a successful project, should be the same to all parties. So I will now proceed, but I have a feeling I've written too much. But I will move along as rapidly as I possibly can. Consultants undertaking the duties of contract administration must be cognizant of the need to exercise a duty of skill and care to the parties, and can be held liable if they are considered reckless, and if any of the parties to the contract suffers unreasonable harm or loss as a result of their action, their inaction, or their partiality. Effective contract administration commences very early in the typical project cycle and involves many activities not usually defined as such. In this context, we've broken this off into two main headings: pre-contract activities and contract activities. And within each of those, there are clearly identifiable subtasks and components that merit comment. So we'll start off with the pre-contract activities. Pre-contract procedures will rely on accurate representation of what is required in design, time, and cost, and on the selection of the best contract for the delivery of the product. The need to assemble a contract administration team is dependent on the scale, nature, and complexity of the project, the significance of the procurement, and the need to comply with the client organizational policy. Prior to commencement, the parties should be aware of the requirements of the execution of the works, specifications, the nature of the works, the nature of the environment, time for delivery, liquidated damages, and how payments will be made for works done. And this all relates to certainly the choice of the form of contract. The selection of the most appropriate form of contract is essential to successful project implementation and is often not given the attention it deserves, bearing in mind the significant impact it can have on contract administration. Forms of contract vary considerably, depending on the client organization, whether public or private, and on the scale, nature, and complexity of the works involved. I know I'm speaking obvious things, but they're important. In the private sector in Jamaica, the main building works contracts are the CIC forms with quantities, and the civil works contracts are FITIC-based remeasurement contracts. The public sector utilizes both these forms, as well as relatively new standard GOJ forms which are yet to be fully tested and for which no substantial case history has been developed. And there are even some government agencies that have crafted their own forms of contract. There is also an increasing use of design-build contracts, and in Jamaica this is largely unfamiliar territory, although some of you may have had pretty close experience with some of those. Many projects in Jamaica are funded through multilateral agencies such as World Bank, IDB, CDB, all which have their different, though somewhat similar forms of contract. Bilateral agreements also involve national agency, like USAID, CEDA, UK, EU, forms of contract, some of which can be extremely detailed and demanding. The variety of contracts and requirements poses professional challenges to the contract administration consultants, who should clearly have the relevant experience and expertise depending on the particular circumstances of the project. Given this cornucopia of contract forms, it is suggested that some national and perhaps international consultation between all stakeholders be organized to reduce the number and variety and to update them to respond to changing circumstances and developing technology. And that's a very big ask, but it's something that I really feel strongly ought to be done. In this regard, the identification of the contract administrator, be they architects, engineers, project managers, or otherwise, is a critical action, and their roles, responsibilities, and authority in the contract must be clearly defined. These responsibilities can be awesome, some say onerous, and this is not often recognized by the participants to the contract. It is therefore important for the client or employer to ensure that whoever is placed in this vital position possesses the required qualities to protect both his technical and contractual interests for the period of the contract. I move on to the preparation of contract and tender documentation. The efficient and successful implementation of works contracts is directly dependent on the accuracy and relevance of the working drawings, specifications, and bills of quantities prepared by the hopefully registered consultants, although this is not always a guarantee for performance. It goes without saying that well-prepared, clear, complete, and comprehensive contract documentation will minimize the need for variations and reduce the likelihood of disputes. Provisional sums ought to be kept to the absolute minimum. The contract administrator, in order to avoid later claims for extra time and cost, should verify the provision of all site and geotechnical details. How often have we seen projects halted after possession of the site because of the boundary or site conditions? The importance of preempting the contractor's site queries cannot be overemphasized. Associated with the contract tender documents are the bidding documents and the bidding procedures that are used in the selection of contractors. The tender methodology varies according to the nature and requirements of the client: private sector, public sector, multilateral, bilateral. And again, the persons responsible for preparing these must be fully cognizant of the most appropriate procedure to be used and the details involved with same. On to another heading, tender action and contract award. On the assumption that the bidding documents are well prepared and appropriate, tender action should follow in an efficient manner, and the contractor offering the best value for money selected in a fair and transparent process. For some projects, it may be necessary to have a pre-bid conference or on-site meeting with prospective bidders. And in any event, procedures should be established to enable clarification during the tender period and thereby avoid problems during construction. There are some observations I would like to make regarding the tender process, particularly with respect to the public sector procurements. The evaluation processes are often far too lengthy and sometimes burdensome, quite often due to myriads of approvals and the lack of clarity and coordination in the tender documents. And secondly, many contractors do not pay close attention to the instruction to bidders, and as a consequence prevent themselves from being selected, which in turn results in a loss of resources to all and of value for money for the public purse. Common failings include tender bonds not stamped by the tax department and a host of other, some would call them hurdles or pitfalls that some bad person may say that were created specifically to make the contractors fail. That's not quite true. I think it mostly has to do with lack of diligence by all parties. Tender action ends with the selection of the best evaluated contractor and you'll have noticed that everything set up to now has been before the works commence, pointing out the importance of pre-contract preparation in order to avoid disputes rather than going through the costly and time-consuming process of settling them later. Contract activities. The foundation of effective contract administration lies in a working knowledge of the contract under which the works are being administered. The administrator's role is to ensure that the conditions of the contract are fulfilled in terms of its time, quality, and cost objectives. Contract signing is generally preceded by the selected contractor, providing various documents critical to the effective and efficient conduct of the contract: performance bonds, insurances, construction schedules, cash flow projections, site personnel, etc. The form of performance bond is often an issue with the bonding agencies not recognizing that bonds are for the performance of the entire contract, right up to the final certificate and not just to practical completion. Nothing is worse in contract administration than a lack of or miscommunication. Pre-commencement protocols should be established for indexing and dating all documentation and methods imposed to ensure unmistakable communications. An effective contract strategy must be established and should include but be not limited to the scheduling of meetings, scheduling of payments, submissions for payment, procedures for the request of changes, variations, who may issue and how, procedure for handling disputes, issuance of certifications, ensuring compliance to statutory authorities like boundaries, height, health, and safety regulations. At this time, the contractor should have examined all the contract drawings, specifications, and quantities to detect any conflicts, errors, and omissions and bring those to the attention of the contract administrator for resolution. Contract implementation in a serious way. Once construction has begun, it is important for all to understand that the contract to be implemented is not by a set of expert individuals, but by the team. The traditional mental posture of disparate team members to view all matters in terms of them and us must be rejected. The architect, engineer, contract administrator is not there to chastise the contractor or his subcontractors, but to assist and have the patience to explain any part of the contract requirements unsure to him. The contractor, on the other hand, must understand that all components of the contract, including the work of his suppliers and subcontractors, are his direct responsibility. Once the work is detailed and specified before the work starts, there can be no excuse or reason for the contractor not to proceed, as the contract quaintly calls it, regularly and diligently. In this area, practical experience is of major importance, and good communication links between construction site and project management offices or contract administration offices must be maintained. The administration management team would consist of contract administrator, be it the architect, engineer, or what have you, project consultants, again, architects, engineers, quant-surveyors, technicians, clerk of works, resident engineer, or any other suitable person by agreement with the employer, depending on the nature and size of the contract. I don't think I need to go through in detail what the clerk of works or the resident engineer does, but it's important just to say that they are the ones with the eyes, ears on site who needs to record everything that happens to ensure that there is an agreed record of all events that happen on site. And this is an absolutely important requirement to ensure effective contract administration. There's the matter of holding regular site meetings and site visits by the consultants to inspect the works and check for compliance with the conditions of contract, to carry out technical meetings with the contractor, subcontractors, and others concerned, to review progress and discuss any problems which might have arisen, and, of course, to make such additional visits as might be required to deal with emergencies or unforeseen circumstances like water on site. What I'm thinking about is reports of each site meeting. They should be submitted to keep the employer fully informed and the contractor as well. During the course of construction, the project architect, engineer, contract administrator, assisted and supported by other project consultants, would be responsible for the following: monitoring delivery to site of materials critical to the program, maintaining communication between all parties concerned, arranging and presiding at regular site meetings to record progress and all matters pertaining to the works, reviewing and approving shop drawings, samples, and other submissions by the contractors. By the way, I'm pulling this straight out of our own practice manual in my firm. So, in collaboration with the conservator, receiving and evaluating claims and preparing interim certificates for payment by the employer, obtaining the employer's approval of issuing and approving all change or variation orders in accordance with contract conditions, ensuring the construction works, including specialist finishes, conform to acceptable industry standards and contract specifications, identifying substandard construction work and bringing it to the contractor's attention, ensuring works which fail to conform to drawings and specifications are not accepted, ensuring that required tests to relevant sections of the works and equipment are conducted in accordance with conditions, receiving and responding to, on a timely basis, all contractor queries recorded on pre-numbered requests for information, coordinating the preparation of schedules of RFIs, as they're called, and indicating their status, identifying critical information required and ensuring all verbal instructions are subsequently confirmed by written methods, receiving, evaluating, and making recommendations on behalf of the employer for all claims submitted by contractors with respect to variation orders, extensions of time, with or without loss and expense, acceleration, etc. The team leader will submit monthly and other reports to be agreed with the employer to provide information on the schedule, progress of the works, causes for the delay, measures required to recover lost time, financial reports, cash flow projections, estimated completion costs and additional costs, if any, assessment of the project status and recommendations for any action by the employer, and any other factors affecting the project. The commissioning and handover process should start some weeks before practical completion is reached. In this way, the checking and testing required is spread over sufficient time to allow proper attention to detail. And so I won't bore you with the full details of that. Needless to say that it's a process that can take quite some considerable time. And depending on the nature of the project, we'd suggest that it starts very, very early, so that at the time for practical completion, the extent of remedial work is kept to an absolute minimum. During the defects liability period, the contractor and his contractors are required to rectify all defects listed at the time of practical completion. They're also required to make good any latent defects or faults which subsequently develop during the same period. Consultants will carry out a final inspection, issue final completion certificate after all defects have been made good. And at this time, there are other things take place: preparation of as-built drawings based on marked-up drawings from the contractor, and the preparation of final accounts by the conservators. Two areas of contract administration that are often cause for concern are the issuance of variations and the assessment of extensions of time. Variations are almost inevitable in construction contracts. They should not necessarily be seen as causes for concern, but should be effectively managed to ensure that the product delivered is what was expected by the client. It is important to understand the implication of change for both parties. Every design change has a cost effect, and major cost changes can affect the viability of the project. This is why it is important that professionals employed are competent and are aware that they can be held liable for misrepresentation if they fail to exercise a proper duty of care. Where changes are not as a result of professional error, the need to communicate with both parties to mitigate the effects will be necessary. Assessing extensions of time must be done in accordance with the terms laid out in the contract. Reasons under which extensions are given enumerated, and the administrator must ensure that due notices are received in time. The records kept by the administrator in the site diary will ensure that any assessment given can be substantiated. Rain days, days on which materials were available, etc. I think I may have overrun the time, so finally, effective contract administration is successful if the following is achieved. The arrangement for delivery is satisfactory to both parties, and the expected value for money is realized by all. The client is satisfied that the product promised is being achieved at the quality specified and that the product is delivered on time. The contractor is responsive and is assured of fairness in the assessment of variations. Disputes are minimized, efficiencies are realized, and most importantly, there are no surprises. And lastly, both contractor and consultant are paid in a timely manner in accordance with their respective contract conditions. I thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you very much. Mr. McIntyre, the consultant's view. Mr. Burrows, can you come up for me, please? Any members, anybody here from the BITU? Any BITU? Yes. Okay. Those are our partners in our labor agreement that we have with the workers in the construction industry. We work very well with them, and we have always been able to renew our agreement on time and without any conflict, and we continue to recognize you, and thanks for coming. I think I recognize Ms. Gordon from JNB. Welcome, ma'am. Thanks for coming. Two presentations have been made so far, and there's a theme that has come up in both, and it has to do with provisional sums. And I suspect, based on my own experience over the last maybe 5-6 years, that provisional sums are being put into the BQ to substitute for investigations that are incomplete or designs that have not been properly completed. And it would be very interesting to hear from you out there in the panel discussion questions on this particular aspect. I think it's something that we need to get into, to elaborate on, and to find out from our presenters how they feel about this, what I consider to be a vexed issue of provisional sums that are put in arbitrarily. And so we look forward to the panel discussion which will take place right after the next speaker. I like a particular phrase that Mr. McIntyre used when he said the idea of them and us is to be rejected. And I think that's a very, very good thought to bear in mind whenever parties enter into a contract. A contract is a partnership. It is not we against them or them against us. And I think we ought to really bear that in mind as something that we take away from here. Our next presenter is Mr. Donald Moore. He's a civil engineer with over 25 years of experience in civil engineering and project management. A graduate of the UWI St. Augustine, Mr. Moore holds a master's degree in civil engineering from Clemson University, South Carolina. He's a project management professional and has served on the board of the Jamaica Dr. Bird chapter of the Project Management Institute. He's also on the council of the Jamaica Institution of Engineers. He's worked with the NWC and the UDC before joining the NHT in 1992. And he now has oversight at the NHT for planning and implementation of the NHT's construction and development portfolio. I now invite Mr. Donald Moore to bring the perspective of the client to the seminar 2015 Master Builders.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. When Mr. McIntyre came up, he spoke about Don having taken, it seems, all his notes. I know we work electronically these days, and there are people in all of these agencies who are ready to share because it's a partnership. But it seems as if they both took all of mine. And therefore, I will try my very best not to keep going over the same ground. As usual, all protocols are observed in the interest of time. I can start by noting and agreeing that all parties have an interest in a successful project. And I think we need to start there every single time. What comes out, though, is that we, having identified some of the issues that are involved, and we spoke about many, we do not then take the next step of trying to put them right. I will tell you that a committee was established because the public sector and the public sector agencies accept responsibility for its part in some of the lack of achievement of the objectives of the projects in general. And so a committee was established, including the master builders, including the engineers, the architects, the NCC, the OCG, to seek to identify ways of ensuring that some of the issues that were raised can be addressed, and the public, who we all serve, receive value for money, because that is the primary objective of what we're doing. We started out having quarterly meetings, and as usual, we are always too busy to save time. We will seek to have those meetings back on track, put back on track. Don, in his presentation, started pretty much at the tender stage, which is where the contractors come in. But through this committee, we are trying to pull everybody to the start of the cycle, from the moment we conceptualize projects. So my presentation will look at the context, the public sector culture within which we operate, contract management versus contract administration, and just delve a little bit in the pre-award period, the decisions that are required, strategies used, and so on. I think Ray went into significant details as well in the tendering process and so on and so forth, and the contract and the various clauses. So I'll just try to skip over those areas. My experience, as was noted, is in the public sector. The only private sector experience I have is at my house trying to get some services and some goods. And, you know, I, too, ignore those things that I know. I know that you need to have a clear scope when the man comes in to do whatever work. But I said, you know, just do this. I know that I need to make proper payment arrangements, but it never ever works. I know we need to be able to measure the thing when he's done and say, yes, you are finished. But we always end up not agreeing, not seeing eye to eye. And when I say, all right, do this too, the management of that change is not properly done. And of course, the only dispute resolution we have is probably the machete or cuss out and thing, right? Which is why, and the police will tell you, that we end up having the levels of murders and all of those things in the country, because we can't seem to find a way to properly, in an organized way, resolve our dispute. But I think I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, because that's a total presentation. At the National Housing Trust, we manage a wide range of contracts. Goods from a little tape to a trencher. Services from getting a little laborer to getting a lawyer. Works from buying a little door to doing a whole development. But my focus now is going to be on construction works, because that is where the IMAJ is at. And since I'm a guest of theirs, I will keep within that area. We operate at the National Housing Trust in a project management environment. So we try to organize all of those pre-award things. We try to ensure that those post-award activities, and maybe Mr. McIntyre can tell you some of the problems, discussions, and Don as well, that we get into sometimes, seeking to have all of the areas addressed in a reasonable and rational way. It's not always easy. So, the major concerns of the people of the country is really value for money and proper project governance, compliance with all the terms and conditions, and of course minimizing all of those overruns and so on, which sometimes end up not giving you the value for money that we seek after. In the public sector, we have a whole lot of legislation, and I want to tell you that people are nervous about every single decision that is made, because there is some act that may get you. I see my friends from the OCG here. Public Procurement Act, which is being revised as we speak. Public Bodies Management and Accountability Act, Contractors General Act, Financial Administration and Audit Act. All of these are supposed to be guiding the behavior, the actions of the officers within the public sector. And of course, you have the oversight bodies who ensure that these rules are followed. Talk about the Auditor General, and sometimes we are dragged before Parliament to answer all manners of questions. No, there is a culture that exists, and I can tell you that based on all of what I just spoke about, that culture is changing. And we talk about acting in good faith. That means you sit down there and you know that this is how the thing ought to go, that contractor, you must submit your report by X time. But you don't come and we just say, well, and we send it the next time. The decision-making bureaucracy is heavy, which then cause your start date, usually, to be at variance and a stranger to your base date of your contract. So you start asking for trouble before you sign that contract. Then the employees, and even when you get into the matter of disputes, employees tend not to be owners. It's not my thing. I mean, when it's my thing, let me tell you something. I'm going to fight tooth and nail for every single inch that you get. But it's people thing, So it is not the same to make sure that the outcome is achieving the value for money that we seek. And we tend not to be affected by the outcome. We talk about accountability. Even for the contractors, we've been talking about performance standards and measures and so on. It's not yet in place. So the contractor can perform poorly, having put in a price at which he can't do the work, and then he'll get the next contract by doing the same thing. So these are matters that we need to address. The contracts themselves, the conditions of contracts and so on, in the past, were matters for the technical people. Them, no deal with that. No, not about that. But slowly, and certainly at the National Housing Trust, all of these are now legal documents and are treated as such. They are properly gone through to ensure that if you put something in your particular conditions of contract, it is because you want it there, not because I never know to write the thing properly and so on. And of course, the culture of informality, that we tend not to write. We like to talk. I talk to you, I say, we agree, So, but then where is it in writing? I had a sign up in my office. I took it down some time ago. That if it isn't written, it is not said. Right? So make sure you put it in writing. We are always in a hurry to implement things in the public sector. As much as the bureaucracy keeps it from happening. Don talks about 3 weeks to prepare your tender, even for complicated projects. But we're in a hurry sometimes because the money will have to be spent within a certain timeline. Are there other imperatives? We know some of them. The economic issues are real. That we are really trying to squeeze out every single bit of value for money. Right? We're in housing. And let me tell you, a significant portion of the people cannot, if you just calculate the cost of blocks to put them one on top of each other, to make a room, a significant number of people cannot afford it. And therefore, we're always struggling to get the best price possible for those people. the fact that we have to tender for all services will cause a little bit of, let me say, constraint on our part. Because while we accept that there are some professionals, nobody here, of course, who are absolutely and extremely difficult. And some contractors will tell me that if John up on the project, me not going to tender. Right? Say true. But I can't say I want Mary to do the project after tender. And if John wins, well, you have John. So we start out as clients knowing that we're going to have some problems here. Yes. Right? We are still trying to find a way to address that. Maybe I need to speak with the NCC and the OCG. But it is more than just about the contractor. The contract life cycle definition, one definition, is that the process of systematically and efficiently managing contract creation, execution, and analysis for maximum operational and financial performance and minimizing risk. Now that's it. That is what the client is about. That is what the client wants. And I'm sure everybody else. Now there are two distinct periods, upstream or pre-award, and downstream or post-award. A lot has been said about the post-award period. But when we look at contract management, for us, it begins from the moment you are conceptualizing the case for this project. It takes you through the development of that case. What are your needs? How do you define them? How do you design comprehensively? The contract formulation, which is a tender, what form of contract, and so on and so forth, and a tender process. Contract administration. How do you ensure that the contractor and the client perform what it is that they have promised? And of course, most importantly, I just spoke about it, the relationship management. So when you know that this consultant will have major issues with this contractor, there is somebody who will need to jump in quickly and ensure that that relationship is properly managed. And of course, the review of the performance under the contract at the end of the day. I don't think we do enough of that. Contract administration begins and ends with good contract management, especially in what I talk about, the foundation stages. When we are in the business, if you put in good foundation, chances are your house will be fine. So the issue of, as Don says, faulty contract management may be so, but that's just a part of it. And I think Ray went into it. If the design isn't properly done, if you do not understand what is it that you want in your construction contract and properly identify the various elements, chances are even a good administrator will find problems. So the pre-award stage, the idea, or as the NHT, the mission to build houses. So you know what we are into. Get a project manager on spot. Of course, the management of your contract has started. The project management plan, the needs elaboration, what you want, to make sure that that is properly identified. What are your critical success factors, your risk? Do you want to be the designer? You want to get a designer to do it for you, or do you want the design build, as we are also going into that area more and more? As a contractor, you take it on your risk and determine how you achieve my performance specs. The employer designs what role will you give to this engineer versus this administrator? We have found that in a lot of instances, we have excellent design engineers. But let me tell you something. They are absolute strangers to the conditions of contracts that we use. And it's just a reality. And also the flip side also works. We have some excellent administrators who can't design a thing if it were to save their life. But so we are trying to manage these things from the client perspectives all the time. So who leads your team? Who are the members of your team? And you have all the list of people who you ought to consider to be on the team. The team requirements, the significance of the team leader. That team leader must establish a certain environment for all the members to be able to play their part. It is critical that they work together and not work as individuals. We have had so much of that, you'd be amazed. So we have gone through, all right, we used to procure each of those members individually and then put them together. Of course, we now know that in more than 50% of the cases, we are going to have problems. So we say, you put your team together, and we still have some issues. Boy, the man not pay me, you know, those Jamaican issues, we have them right here. The knowledge and experience and the appropriate level of authority of each of the team members is important, because sometimes the leader also run roughshod over the team members, and that sometimes creates problems. Make sure that the level of skill is the level that you want. Don't just put people on your team. Like for a lawyer, you want a construction lawyer, not just any person who has been trained in law. So the team assembly, size and complexity of the project, that should be part of what is considered. The role and responsibilities of each member, communication, we keep hammering about that. Communication. And this goes for every aspect of life, much less something as important as a contract. The communication between the team members, among all of the people, including the contractor, the client, everybody. The communication and the protocols are extremely important. And of course, we go into design elaboration, which Ray had dealt with significantly. Contract formation, Ray went into this, so I'll skip over most of it. You must follow the GOJ procurement guidelines, part of contract management strategy, trying to manage the employer's responsibility, which is part of what a good administrator will do. Manage the employer's responsibilities. Because even if you are not the designer, or you are the designer, which we find sometimes, you need to understand, Ray talks about the engineer having, or the administrator being held liable for their decision. But in Jamaica, it hardly happens. So the engineer will not respond to queries in time. And everything, remember, time in a contract is of the essence. And it is, at the end of the day, the client and the people who will have to pay. So during the contract management strategy development, you consider the value of the works overall, the type of specs you are going to use, performance or conformance, the complexity of the project, which then would feed into the time you give the contractor to prepare his or her bid, the time scale, when you want the project, phasing of the project, the form of relationship, how you're going to measure it, all of those things, whether it is going to be a partnership or whatever. And also, importantly, the likely tenderers. Who do you expect to tender? Because you have to identify those risks and plan for them. We talk about desired outcome, value for money, everybody meeting their obligations, that there are no disputes. If you get to that stage, to God be the glory. That there are no surprises. Yeah, like, say, boy, you never know, say, so you do this, you know? If it is not, and this is on both parts, both the contractor's part and on the administrator's part, there are things that they talk about advising as soon as you become aware or ought to have become aware. And these are important things because they expect good faith in the management of contracts. So you don't say, boy, I know, so this is going to happen to him, you know. As happens in tenders, by the way. Contractor go and say, I know that this quantity wrong, you know. So watch me and them. And we talk about unbalanced tenders, put in a big number for that and a little number someplace else, you know. And so when you come to measurement, then it comes up and bites you. The conditions of contract, part of the tender document, sets the rules, governs rights and obligations, risk transfer, what is employer risk, what is contractor risk, includes the general conditions, the particular conditions, the employer's obligations. Of course, we, in preparing the document, ought to ensure that there's no ambiguity, that you disclose everything you know. So if I did a soil report, and the soil report, for example, sometimes you do a little borehole, and it may differ from the soils report that was done later on. It is important to give the contractors, during the tender process, all of this information, so it can be taken into account as they evaluate their bids. And of course, that you should have an experienced lawyer construction lawyer dealing with their conditions. Forms of contract, Ray went into that. The various standards prepared by the Ministry of Finance, the funding agency standards, JCC, FIDIC. FIDIC is what we use. So we don't get into trying to develop standards of our own or to use untested standards. We go directly to FIDIC. And in particular, the Red Book. Employer design, 99% of the time at the moment. The Yellow Book is in the wings waiting. We're going contractor design. And the shortfall, of course, we talk about extensive case law and written guidelines all over the place, so you should not have a problem interpreting the various clauses. The basic principles design primarily undertaken by the employer. Works are to be remeasured in accordance, and this is important, in accordance with the contract documents, not remeasured generally. It's in accordance with what it is that you were contracted to do. The employer appoints the engineer to administer, and the engineer, of course, is a name. It could be Ray, the architect, on behalf of the client. And engineer has power. This is part of to vary the works, but of course we do a little modification in the particular application because there is a variation policy of government, and that has to be included in your contract. And of course the DAB has the power to resolve any dispute and change the determination of the engineer, who of course is my agent. Of course, the engineer must be named, and the contract, and this is important because a lot of times the engineer's contract is not compatible with the assigned duties and responsibilities under the contract. So it is important that you, from the very outset, understand where you want to go so that these things can be incorporated in the engineer's contract. So limitations and so on should be identified. And the limits on authorization and the authority of the engineer must be in the particular conditions of contract. And Ray spoke about this. The administrator must know the contract. And know here means be extremely familiar with the contract. So, fundamental issues at tender, the complete design. Now, I believe about 90% of what Don spoke about a while ago can be placed right here because we suffer from this particular issue. Complete design. The scope is clear, the specification is detailed, it limits problems later on. Again, the conditions of contract must be comprehensive, unambiguous, identify all the rights and obligations. All this information that you have disclosed, a proper payment structure, proper method of measurement, change management properly identified, and how you resolve dispute. Now, Don spoke about this thing called a reasonable price, because that's one of the other reasons why there are all of these problems. And I just want to tell you, I'm also a commissioner of the NCC. And we struggle as well because you go through the process of registering contractors, right? And in doing that, we say these are people competent and experienced in this particular thing. So, if it is that you send out complete designs where the scope is clear, the detailed specs are clear, where the conditions of contract, which I presume they have read, is comprehensive and unambiguous. All the relevant information that you have has been disclosed. What is the point at which the work cannot be done for a price that the contractor says you can do it? What is that point? And that is a major problem. Where are you going to say, I am going to prevent the people of the country from getting value for the buck that we're about to spend? And that is where a huge part of the challenge is. Of course, in the handbook, we try to identify that place by talking about plus or minus 15% of the pre-tender estimate. But let me tell you something. Sometimes I have, on behalf of the National Housing Trust, to go in front of the Infrastructure Committee of Parliament, and I see that the chairman of that committee was here earlier. And I don't know how to defend this thing called a pre-tender estimate, because they're all over the place. No, it is not just that we want something for nothing, because there's a cost to everything. But having regard to the economic situation that we are in, we must seek after this thing called value. And I tell you, I hope we can find, working along with the partners, to get as close as possible to that place. The post-award period. As I said before, by this time the foundation is so well laid that a fairly good, not a good, a fairly good administrator will breeze through this contract like it's nothing. And that is the objective of the committee that I spoke about earlier, to get to the stage where everybody behaves in a way that when the project is completed, we can all be happy, and we don't have all of these things where we go all the various places, including to the Privy Council. The contract, we spoke about the documents, is an agreement between two parties. Again, the administrator is not a party to the contract and is making all the decisions. The engineer's duties and authority is in the contract and may be required to obtain the engineer's approval for the various issuing of variations, etc., etc. And of course, he's deemed to act with the employee's approval. So whatever he does, have to just take the responsibility, right? Because he's acting. If I didn't put a little thing saying, can't do this, if he does it, then it presupposes that I've given him the authority. The main thing in administration is, and we talk about it, we have a pre-construction meeting. We have meetings with the administrator. And because I have my book, Yeah, man, I walk with my book. Yes. And I say, listen, the thing is written down here, You don't have to guess it. Every action that you are required to take is written down. Who's supposed to do what? When the contractor ought to submit what? When the employer ought to do what? When the administrator himself or herself have to do what? It's identified. It's not rocket science. But let me tell you something. Pulling teeth is a walk in the park. Emancipation Park, that is. So, they observe the rules from the get-go. The documents that are required, remember that time is of the essence, observe the deadlines, review and feedback, give them as is required. Appoint your DAB. Now, it is important that when you are appointing your DAB, you explore all potentials for conflict. Because you really and truly want for that to be the place at which all decisions are made. It is really not in anybody's interest for it to go anywhere else. Repeat. It is in the interest of the project and all concerned for all decisions, if they have to go anywhere, to end at the DAB. So you want to have somebody without conflict, somebody who is respected and has the experience. And if you do this, a lot of money can be saved and time. The rest of this is about the clauses that Ray would have gone through substantially. I won't delay our discussions any further in that regard. So I just want at this stage to stop and to thank you so much for listening. You seem to have listened keenly, and I thank you.
I want to draw particular attention and to acknowledge Jamaica National Building Society. Jamaica National came on board with us in 2014, or was it 2013? 2013? 2 years now. This is your third year. And I want to acknowledge in particular Ms. Tiffany Gordon, who is the executive mortgage sales. Am I correct? I'm glad that you came. You can see that the attendees are enjoying your seminar because you are our main sponsor. So we convene at 1:10, 1:15. So you have roughly about an hour and 10 minutes to chop and go. And I'm going to ask David to come forward now with the presentations very quickly so that we can get out of here somewhere around in about another 3 or 4 minutes. And then lunch will commence. David Garrell.
As a token of our appreciation, the Master Builders Association would like to give some handouts. Appreciation for you being here, firstly, and also our main sponsor would also like to express their gratitude and their appreciation for the presentations and contributions of the panel and the moderator. So I'm going to ask the executive of mortgage sales, Tiffany Gordon, to join me up top here, please.
Hi, good morning. How are you? I'm very happy to be here again to be participating as a sponsor for this event, which I hold very close to me just because of the relationship that Jamaica National has as a financial institution with these type of organizations, especially master builders, where you have your engineers, your architects, and all of that. We do realize that without you, we wouldn't have homes to finance. So we're very grateful for that. I'm also very grateful to the presenters who have presented very enlightening information about the industry and things to come. Thank you very much for that. And as a basis of my gratitude, I would like to present you with a small token on behalf of Jamaica National. So, Mr. President, Mr. President first, can you please approach Mr. Carville Stewart?
You okay?
Thank you. My second gift is to Mr. Donald Mullings. Oh, the presentation. It's funny. My third gift is to Mr. Raymond McIntyre. Uncle. I'm fine. My fourth gift is to Mr. Donald Moore. Sweet. Him smell good, do you see? And my last gift is for Mr. Dean Burrows. I thank you and have a beautiful day.
Welcome back, welcome back. Let me just bring something to your attention that I was just made aware of. There is a group called the Jamaica Licensed Electricians Association. And they are registered by a board of registration and an examiner associated with the Ministry of Mining and Energy. And it is an attempt to bring the electricians under licensing and under registration. So they've asked that I make an announcement to just make you aware of it. I think, Carvel, we're going to ask that they make contact with the master builders so that we can see how we can bring them into association with us. Okay. The first workshop, well, workshop 1, is to be presented by a gentleman who, if I am to go through his bio, it's going to take an hour. Let me just tell you that he has a diploma in accounting from the College of Arts, Science and Technology, University of Technology now. He has an MBA from the Chapman Graduate School, Florida International University, and he has a certificate from Wharton Real Estate Business School from the University of Pennsylvania. That one is extremely rough. He's a fellow of the Association of Chartered Certified Accountants, the UK, and also a fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Jamaica. Carlton Earl Samuels has a distinguished career in the field of financial and general management. As financial manager and consultant, he has worked in several private and statutory organizations and was appointed assistant manager, general manager at the Jamaica National Building Society in 2011. And you know that the JNB Group is our title sponsor here. So I'm going to ask Earl Samuels, CDJP, to come and address us on the topic of financing construction projects. Applause, please. Thank you.
Mr. Carvel Stewart, President of the Incorporated Master Builders Association, members of the association, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. You know, if I had seen the program before getting here, I would have do whatever is necessary to convince the organizers not to put me after lunch. I know it's not only a difficult time for the presenter, but it's also a difficult time for you, because most of us the lunch tend to have a certain effect on us. But I'll keep the presentation short and let it be more interactive. So I know this is an area which can be quite challenging for us, the finance part of it. So I will make my presentation pretty brief and then respond to your questions. But first of all, let me thank you for the opportunity to participate in the annual seminar of the Incorporated Master Builders of Jamaica, which brings together all the major players in our building and construction industry. And you're here, I recognize, to take a concerted effort to review what is happening in the industry and to plan your way forward. And although when I was being introduced, I think the bias of it tend to give the impression that I know only about financing. But I've been integrally involved in the construction sector for a number of years, as a matter of fact, since 1992. And I think my involvement has resulted in the largest spend in the construction sector in Jamaica. I'll not say anything more about that. Over the past 2 years, we have experienced the most interesting trend in the construction industry. And despite the state of our economy, there seems to be a certain level of optimism, given that the ongoing expansion in the highway, which continues to open up new zones for both housing construction and commercial construction. And I understand that there is some arrangement with the Chinese, who are presently involved in constructing the final leg of the highway, that they have reserved an area for massive commercial development and also housing. So you being the major players in the sector, I am sure you're positioning yourselves to take full advantage of this opportunity. In fact, your meeting is actually taking place in what seems to be a buoyant context for the construction industry. We have also had recent announcement about a major hotel and a number of startups which are likely to emerge from the economic zones which should be coming on stream. You know, sometimes in Jamaica it's pretty difficult to forecast and make predictions and so on. But based on the way we see things going, I'm optimistic that before long we'll get some activities in this area. So on that basis, my presentation this afternoon on financing construction projects is not only relevant, but it also provides participants in this annual seminar with the opportunity to re-examine their methodologies and refine their approach to seeking financial support for their construction projects. For many years, most of the construction financing was provided by commercial banks. And Jamaica National, we were mainly focusing on providing the takeout for purchasers of residential units and a few office supply. As a matter of fact, over the years, Jamaica National has provided financed more than 50% of the private mortgage market. I think the only entity which is above Jamaica National at this time is the National Housing Trust. They are funded differently from us, and they have a different target market, although there is also an overlap because we have a relationship with them where we have a joint finance mortgage program where they provide part of the funding and we provide part of the funding. However, Jamaica National, as I said, have been providing for many residential construction commercial office projects. And I must take this opportunity to say that our competitiveness will further be increased as we embark on the path to become the third largest commercial bank in Jamaica. We should launch as Jane Bank by April 2016. We have received the green light from the BOJ and from the Ministry of Finance. Thank you for that. And we will be further putting the other players on their toes, so they will have to sharpen their pen, our pencils come forward. So I'm sure that is good news for your association. It will be the Jane Bank. So naturally, Jane Bank will become a more active player in the developmental arena, even as it continues to maintain its position as one of the largest mortgage financier, both in Jamaica and the Caribbean. But let's focus specifically on financing construction. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no question that financing construction projects is more risky than providing mortgages to homeowners. As a result, the rate of interest charged for construction financing, as you are aware, carries a risk premium to cover the additional risk inherent in the business. But don't go away thinking because I said carries a risk premium that it is unaffordable. Later on, I will just update you on the range of our interest rate for development financing. Therefore, based on the nature of construction projects, there are key factors which are to be considered by a financier to determine if a loan is to be granted for a particular development, as well as the interest rate to be applied. And so to successfully qualify for construction financing, the borrower must have a good track record, an experienced team. They must ensure that they have a market for the product which they are, will be delivering. And there are several factors that are considered in the marketing of the project or the product, such as location, price of units, and so on. There's also another major consideration that the project must be time-based and must be patently clear when the construction project will start and when the project will end. In the construction business, time is money. The longer it takes for you to deliver on your project, especially if you're getting large sum of development financing, it will impact on the price. And no longer can you just freely pass on the price to the purchaser of these units. There is a resistance point. So it is important that you deliver your project on time and within budget. And as financier, we look to you to do so. And as I mentioned, one of the factors we consider is your project team, how experienced your project team is, and the track record. As a matter of fact, there is an interest rate advantage to those who have a good track record in the business. And I've seen some of them around. I'm not identifying or calling any names, but over the years, I've provided them with development finance. I'm very pleased, and some of them have made a lot of money. Hair is falling off the head, but they're doing very well and should be emulated. The information required, I'll just outline to you the information that the financer will look to you to provide in considering development financing. There are 5 major categories that we look at, and these are the developer's eligibility, and I will speak more on that. The project information, I'll say more on that. Your marketing plan, the size of the construction loan that you require, and the design and specification of your project, and so on. For special purpose construction project, that is also viewed in a different way from the way we assess a normal, and by normal I mean a project which is there's no special use. For example, if you're approaching us to borrow funding to do like a rice mill, it is hardly likely that any developer would accept the project itself as collateral for the loan. The developer or the promoter of the project would have to provide other collateral. And the primary reason for this is that the risk or the debt capacity of such a specialized asset is very limited. So should the worst happen and the developer goes belly up, that specialized asset as a security is of little comfort to the financier, because to find a buyer to liquidate that security so that the developer can recoup his financing is very limited. Because remember, the financier is not in the business of holding hard assets, like they are in there to, their asset is the funds that they use. So they want to make sure that their funds can be put in and take out so it can be made available for other projects. But let me look at the developer's eligibility. To determine the eligibility of the project for financing, we will require that the promoter of the project or the owner of the project complete what is called a pre-qualification document. And some of the things that we look at on a pre-qualification document is if it's a company, and more likely it will be a company, we want to see that you're a legitimate legal entity, so we want to see your copy of your certificate of incorporation. We want to see your articles to ensure that you have the capacity to borrow. We want to make sure that you're compliant with all your statutory obligations, because that can negatively affect the consideration for development financing. Where you're a legally registered or incorporated entity, we want to make sure that you're in good standing with the Register of Companies. Although mentioned but not, it depends. It will also be good if you provide evidence that you're a member of the Developers Association, because that would further add to your credibility, and that could impact the price of funding that we provide. Then we want some information on the project. And for the project information, it consists of some 5 components. The project information consists of, we want to see some information on the development, such as, or the proposed development, such as where the project will be located, the type of project it will be. For example, if it's a housing project, and we want to make sure it's not a project that is in some remote location where you do not have the social amenities, because this will impact on not only the marketability of the project, but it will also impact on the cost of bringing these social amenities to the project. So those are factors we consider. It provides also, as I mentioned, a description of the project. We want to see the project implementation plan. And the project implementation plan should outline the duration of the project, whether the project will be phased or whether it will be completed at one go. And we want to make sure that your cash flow is designed to meet the phase of the project or the duration of the project. The second component of the project information checklist that we would like to look at, as I mentioned, is the budget. This stipulates the base date, the base selling price, the construction cost, and also if you're seeking financing, we want to make sure that the interest rate that will be applied to the financing provided for the project is also included in the overall project budget. Sometimes I've seen project budgets where developers come to you with seeking financing, have the project plan, but there is no provision in it for the financing cost, and yet you'll be seeking development financing. This can significantly affect the final product, final output. So we want to make sure we have a unit at Jamaica National that is focusing on ensuring that the proper financial plan for the project is in place. So when you submit the documents to us, we will, and David, I can use an example? Of course. You don't mind? I answer for him. You can answer for him. When I was elsewhere, he was a good customer. And even at Jamaica National, he's a good customer. And I think he is not because he's involved in the project and he's sitting here and he's invited me. He's one of your customers, which I am very satisfied. So I think he's a role model for the association. The third is the project land, if you are coming to us with a development project, we want to make sure that you have some stake in the business. And so it would be to your advantage to make sure that you own the land and that the land is unencumbered. The land is normally about, it depends on where the land is located, but it's normally no more than about 10% of the project cost. At JN, we're prepared to lend you up to, and this is now, things could change down the road for the better. We lend you up to 80% of the construction cost. We do not lend you developers markup profit that comes at the back end, and we do not lend you to purchase the land. So those will be, and the whole planning part of it, that will be your equity in the project. You want to roll? So when we're looking at the project land and the documentation, we want to ensure that there is certificate title for the land, or if you do not presently own the land, that you have a land sale agreement with the landowner, and you'll be showing us how you'll be financing it, or whether the landowner is coming in as a JV partner with you, and we'll put up the pledge in the land for the project. We want to see a surveyor's ID report. We want to make sure that the land that you say you will be building on, that is the land that is being presented to us. So the surveyor's ID report, the location plan, the site layout. We also want to make sure that the land, based on your estimate for the development, we want to know about the whole topography of the land. We also want to know about the arrangement you have in place for splinter titles. It will also be good for you to have a current valuation report. We also want to make sure that you're up to date with the tax authorities on the land, that you have your tax payment certificate. Where there is any caveat, any encumbrance on the title to the land, we want to make sure that plans are in place to have those lifted or removed. We also want to ensure that you have the necessary land use approval, that you're not coming to seek a loan to develop a factory in an area where it is not zoned or will not be approved for a factory, or you want to put a residential development in an industrial area. So we want to make sure that sometimes when you're seeking development financing and the financer, the banker is asking you all these questions, you think that they want to be difficult. But it is in your interest. It is a partnership. If you do not have a successful project, the financer can't make money. So it is in our interest to make sure that your project is successful. At Jamaica National, said we not only look at the developer's reputation and experience, we also broaden the scope to include the entire project management team. Note that. We look at the entire team. Your construction, you can only have a successful project if you have a competent team. Therefore, as outlined in the project management information checklist, we want to see the resume for the project management team, as well as information on the selected contractor or the proposed contract that you have with the contractor. Each of these highlighted on the project information checklist requires detailed information which speaks to a host of activities to put the project in its proper context, covering all stages from pre-development to execution to reflect the effective management and operation of the project to result in a successful development. I can't emphasize this too many times, that most of you who are involved in the working as a developer or involved in construction, sure you're not building the project for yourself. You're in it as a business. And so it is very important that you pay keen attention to your marketing plan. So as financier, we want to make sure that you have a well-structured marketing plan in place before we consider your project for financing. A marketing plan for any development is critical. The build it and they will come strategy will not work at this time. They being, and by referring they, the buyers. Hence the major strategies in the marketing plan will include, you must have a defined target market which speaks to affordability. A lot of times, over my experience over the years, is that we tend to build what we like and not building what the market wants. You want to build what you like when you're building your dream house. If you're in the business of providing, in the development business, you're providing for a market. Therefore, you have to build what the market wants. The selling price is also very important. We are interested in the selling price because this provides information on, because we operate also from the mortgage end. So we want to see whether it is based on your target market, whether these people can really afford it, and so that we put ourselves in a position to meet the demand. And therefore, it's important that you do a market survey. And you don't have to engage Bill Johnson or Don Anderson or any of these guys in order to do your market survey. There are several ways in which you can do it, especially if it is just a medium-sized project. As a matter of fact, I know many successful developers. They sell off sometimes more than 50% of the units before they break ground. We like to see that. As a matter of fact, that will impact on the price of the financing that we provide, because that is indicating that there is a lower risk, so the payout will be ready. The construction loan. At present, Jamaica National provides up to, as I said earlier, up to 80% for construction loan. And presently the interest rate range between 10 and 12%. The best you can get anywhere, apart from housing trust. And I don't know if you're in a position now. They don't lend you for other than for housing development at a certain level. But you come to us, and we know the business better than the rest. And we will, I didn't hear that. Yes, thank you very much. And when we become a commercial bank, we'll be able to expand our scope to provide a wider range of development financing. So at present, at Jamaica National, we provide up to 80%, at between 10 to 12%. But to adhere to the loan approval process and requirements, developers should outline the source of funding as a part of the construction loan detail. We want to know how you will be funding the other portion of the cost. So we want to ascertain the source of funding of the developer's equity. If there's money you have sitting in the bank, we want evidence of that. If you will be funding will be provided by a partner or so on, we want to see funding. We want to make sure that when we put up our 80%, you can come up with your 20% for the construction. At this stage, we also agree on the interest rate and the loan period. We don't want an open-ended construction agreement or project. We want to have that you have a specific time to start and a specific time to get out. Because as I mentioned before, timing in the construction business means money. We also want to discuss with you or look at your loan repayment proposals, whether you will be paying the interest on during the construction period, or you want to defer the interest payment until the end of the construction, where you have a balloon payment. We also want to ascertain whether you will be paying from the sale of the units. So that is why we want to make sure that you have a market for the units, especially if you're going to look to the sale proceeds of the units to liquidate the loans. In agreeing to the loan amount and also the interest rate, we want to look at the security that you'll be providing for the loan. We also want to look at the type of guarantee. If you are confident about your project, I can't see any reason why anyone should be reluctant to provide personal guarantee. So that will confirm to us that you have a deep stake in the project when you provide a personal guarantee. And that can also impact on the pricing of the loan. Where you're using a contractor, as a developer, we're engaged in the service of a contractor. We want to make sure that there's a performance bond in place. It's protecting your interests as a developer, and it is protecting our interests as the financer. I want to look at the development, design, and specification. This is the final category that I look on. In the final category of this checklist, in the development and design specification, there are some 10 main areas in this category that we look at. And they consist of approval from a range of government agencies, such as NEPA, the NAA, JPS, Parish Council, and all the myriad of approval agencies. We also want to make sure that the design, the architectural and engineering design has received the approval of the relevant authorities. Ladies and gentlemen, at this seminar, I'll spend a little time to focus on some of the things that Jamaica National, and I'm sure other financial institutions will look at in determining the basis on which to organize and to provide financing for development projects. What I've outlined is not exhaustive and will not be applicable to every project. Some of them are project specific, but most of what I've outlined will apply to a wide range of projects. My objective this afternoon was just to simply articulate and to outline our interest in working with the construction and building sector, and to remind you and to clarify somewhat the basis on which we provide financing. And as we transition to Jamaica JN Bank, we stand ready to work with you, to partnership with you, to take on all the construction and development opportunities that presents themselves as we work together to build this society. Thank you very much.
I thank you very much for this opportunity of presenting my thoughts on the subject of dispute resolution, dispute avoidance, and so on. Before I begin, I would like to explain what I'm about to do, in the sense that there may well be members in the audience who have experienced arbitration. There might even be a couple of attorneys, I don't know. But my remarks, as requested by the President, were intended to be for general consumption, for those, in other words, who were, excuse me, who are not familiar with the exact process of arbitration and the other forms of alternate dispute resolution, particularly as it affects us in the building industry. So for those who have heard all this before, please bear with me. And for those who haven't heard it before, I hope you will find it of some interest. We've heard from previous speakers a number of interesting things on important subjects concerning the construction industry. What I hope to do, as I said just now, is to look at how we deal with the settling of disputes in the industry, which, as I mentioned just now, is commonly referred to as ADR, alternate dispute resolution. Alternate to what, you may well ask? In this case, it is the alternate to the court system. It's alternate to the going to court, and again, we'll come to that later. All of us, I'm sure, here today will recognize the problems of our antiquated and ill-served traditional Jamaican court system. I don't think there's any need for me to explain, even to the most naive of us here today, how badly the general public and the commercial public, in general terms, is badly served by the court system. And it's not up to me here today to go into the deficiencies of the system, except to say that it prevents the progress of natural justice. And that is exactly what we're trying to do when we talk about ADR. And after I've had a chance to review this whole question of ADR, and if time allows me, I'll try and give you an overview on some other forms of conflict administration, because arbitration is not the be-all and end-all of it, as you probably know. And later, after that, to offer some personal views on global issues that affect us in Jamaica. We're getting down to ADR in general before being specific. Let me say that it's not only used in connection with arbitration, although that system is probably the most widely used of the alternates. But it also encompasses other forms of settling disputes, such as mediation, conciliation, expert determination, mini-trials, and more recently, the process which I'm very much in favor of, called adjudication. And so with your consent, Mr. President and members, I will deal first of all with arbitration. The first point I would wish to make, ladies and gentlemen, is that the process of arbitration is not, and nor should it be, a copy of court procedure. Although certain rules of evidence and arriving at decisions must conform to the current laws on the subject, as well as the rules of, as I mentioned just now, natural justice. For those not acquainted with arbitration, let me say that the process need not be complex or unduly formal. If the agreement from which the dispute emerges or comes from calls for a sole arbitrator, which is usually the case, by the way, it then becomes the duty of the arbitrator to conduct and rule the process as he or she sees fit. Somebody once gave me a definition of arbitration. I forget who it was, so I can't acknowledge it. But in very simple terms, the definition is the appointment of an individual arbitrator or a tribunal to hear and decide between parties to a dispute arising from an agreement or a contract made between them and who agree that the decision of the arbitrator will be final and binding on them. So that, in a nutshell, is what the thing is all about. Next, who, you may well ask, can be an arbitrator? Well, in fact, anyone, as long as both parties agree to his or her appointment and agree that they will abide by their decision and that it will be final and binding according to the current law. Now, obviously, there's a lot more to it than just that. Obviously, to appoint an arbitrator, one needs to know if they know anything about the issue, the complications, or the whatever the details are of the initial dispute. It has to be somebody who understands the law, not knows it specifically and particularly, but certainly in general terms. And since I've just used the phrase according to the law, and in any case, since this term is applicable to all of our commercial and other activities, we have a problem here. And let me explain, before I go too far deeply into the subject, let me explain what the problem is. The current governing Jamaican law is an adaptation of a long since out-of-date colonial English law called the Arbitration Act of 1900. I'm going to say that again, 1900. It is regrettable. It is regrettable that none of our legislators, unlike most of our other English-speaking countries in this region, have seen fit to do away. Notice, ladies and gentlemen, I use the term do away because I believe it is so antiquated and irrelevant that no amount of tinkering or amendment can bring it back to life again. It has to be done away with this irrelevant law, and to produce one relevant to us in Jamaica in the 21st century. And Mr. President, if you'll indulge me, as well as all of us involved in one way or another in the construction industry, to issue a plea, not just on behalf of the building industry, but for all in Jamaica concerned with commercial activities. And this plea is to the Minister of Justice to expedite the promulgation of a long-awaited new Arbitration Act for Jamaica. I say that with great sincerity, ladies and gentlemen, and I hope that I will live long enough to see it. Well, having got that commercial out of the way, let me return to the main topic and tell you very briefly what's the big deal, what's the advantages of arbitration over that of litigation or the court system. There are many advantages, but let me just point out a few of them for those that are unfamiliar with the process. First of all, the process is less formal than the courts. Secondly, it is private. That means that if a dispute exists between two entities, two companies that wish to continue their commercial relationship, they don't wish to have a serious last man standing kind of fight, it can be done in private. Press is not invited, spectators are not usually invited, and the arbitration process, the hearing, is usually conducted within closed doors. Next, the award of the arbitrator is final and binding on the parties, and appeals are only granted in exceptional cases. We heard this morning a very cute side reference by one of our speakers. Who was it? Yes, Mr. Donald Moore made us a very slight reference to the Privy Council or the House of Lords, but that is very rare and doesn't happen every day of the week. Another advantage of arbitration is that the time and the place of the hearing is usually arranged to suit the parties. In other words, no courthouse is necessary. I've conducted arbitrations for construction disputes very simply, over and done with in possibly 7-10 days, without any elaborate hearings in somebody's conference room or possibly on the site, and so on. I'm not saying that all procedures are similar, far from it, but it can happen, and it sometimes does happen, that they are very simply organized and simply settled. The issues in disputes, this is another one of the advantages of arbitration, where if you go to court, for example, and you have a technical issue to be resolved, a technical dispute which is based on an issue, I should have said, then a lay judge unless he's a qualified engineer or perhaps an intelligent architect. I say that with reservations, of course. The judge will have to rely on other people, mainly called expert witnesses, to give testimony. And from my experience, I'm sure in some of the people here in the room today, expert witnesses vary considerably as to their attitudes and their environment and so on and so forth. So as far as I'm concerned, as a technical construction arbitrator, is the fact that I can tell, because I've been in the business a few years, been around the block a few times, as they say, and I can tell if somebody is truthful or not. Finally, it is claimed that arbitration is quicker than litigation. This is not always the case, unfortunately, but it's supposed to be. Okay, so those are the main advantages. But as an arbitrator, I really ought to be fair and point out that there are some disadvantages. As far as I can see, there are only two. One is that if you go to court, the cost of the judge is free. He doesn't charge for that. It's at the taxpayer's expense. And similarly, the use of the courthouse is also free. So those are the two exceptions to the rule. Okay, once the identity of the arbitrator, this is moving right along now. Once the identity of the arbitrator has been agreed, he or she takes over the entire proceedings. Then, after becoming familiar with the generality of the case, you'll usually call a preliminary meeting. This may be attended by any of the technical advisors as well as attorneys of the parties, if any. And the main purpose of this meeting, which in my experience, by the way, I must tell you, I find very, very valuable to sort out details in a preliminary meeting rather than later. But the main purpose of the meeting is to set out what I call the rules of the game. Unless the parties themselves have other rules they wish to use. And there are standard rules of arbitration that have been laid down by, as was mentioned earlier, FIDIC and RIBA, the International Chamber of Commerce, and so on. There are many organizations that deal with the settlement of commercial disputes that have their own rules of procedure. Basically, there isn't a great deal of difference between them all, but they all have like I say, the wording is different, but basically they're more or less all the same, and they set out as one would not begin a game of cricket without knowing the rules of the game thoroughly and properly, so that the umpire can perform his function. So an arbitration cannot be begun properly unless the rules are not only known to the arbitrator, but also understood by the parties. It's also very important. Now, what kind of rules are we talking about? What procedure rules are going to be used for the conduct of the arbitration? Well, so I won't go through all the list because it's quite extensive, but let me just bring you the highlights. First one is, and a lot of these, of course, may sound very basic and elementary, but they are obviously I think they're very important enough for me to bring to your attention today. And the first thing is, what is the dispute about? That may sound very simple, but sometimes two people can get into a quarrel, which results in a dispute, and the cause of the dispute could be lost because of emotion, whatever. So it's very important to find out, first of all, what is the dispute about? What are the salient particular issues? What is the genesis of the arbitration? Where does it come from? How does the arbitration get its birth certificate, if you like? And the answer is from the contract itself that the parties have entered into, from which the dispute originates. There are other cases, there are other methods of originating arbitrations, one of which, of course, can be an arbitration ordered by the court, because they have the power to do that. If they find something is too complicated, too technical, no points of law are involved, they'll say, go to arbitration, let the experts settle it, then come back for judgment. So that is another way it works. Another question I always ask is, do the part, in case of construction arbitrations, that is a site visit necessary? Again, may seem very obvious, but it's a question that has to be asked. If the parties want the arbitrator to see the problem in the flesh, as it were, then it is their prerogative for the arbitrator to do so. One thing he's got to remember, he or she has got to remember though, he can't go and look at evidence, as it would be called, or the site of a dispute with one party without the other one being present. If he does, then he's guilty of a thing called misconduct, which I may come to later, but it's not what you think. Then, how is the arbitration to be conducted? Is it going to be word of mouth? Is it going to be written pleadings? What are the methods of communication? And a number of other points which are very important for both parties to agree on. And all of this is, of course, as I said before, the arbitrator is in charge. He's the captain of this little arbitration ship, and he sets the rules, but he has to do so with the consent of both parties. The essential thing being, the whole core and ethos of arbitration is that it is consensual. In other words, both parties must consent to what the arbitrator is doing, and conversely, the arbitrator must not do things that are not in his terms of reference or that he's not empowered to do by the law, empowered by the law so to do, rather. Now, depending on the size and complexity of the dispute, the list I've just given you, or the few items on the list, it may be longer or shorter. The main thing is for the arbitrator, who, as I just mentioned, sets the agenda for the preliminary meeting, is to try and get all these matters of procedure, including time scheduling, agreed up front, so that the process thereafter can continue without interruptions, such as kind of what shall we do next kind of thing, or I disagree with the date you suggested, and so on and so forth. But having done all that, having got the preliminary meeting out of the way, there are certain other processes that to a small extent imitate the court procedure. They're called interlocutory procedures. And these include the submission of claims, production of evidence where it's necessary, the acceptance of the claim and the production of a counterclaim or defense. And this goes on for a little bit, and there are other procedural details which I could go into detail, but it would detract from the generality of what I'm trying to say today. So please excuse me for that. And finally, on that particular subject, it's the arbitrator's job always to see that these processes do not get out of hand and produce delays in the process. Because sometimes if you have lawyers involved, they may use court tactics, for example, to influence or affect the actions and sometimes the judgment of an arbitrator. Well, arbitrators have to resist that sort of temptation and always be aware of the role I just described of being in charge of the proceedings. Changing the subject slightly, what we have found is that basically most cases boil down to how much or what is being claimed, the details of them, and reasons why the other side should pay. The other side, usually called the respondent in arbitrations, as opposed to the defendant in law, will demonstrate why they should not be responsible for such payment or action, and sometimes give details of a counterclaim as well. A little point I'd like to make here for the more sophisticated of those interested in arbitration is that I really ought to point out that everything I'm saying this afternoon applies to what we call domestic arbitrations, that is, arbitrations that take place in Jamaica according to Jamaican law. There are other forms of arbitrations called international arbitrations, where the rules of procedure and the agreed law may well be different to our local standards. And international may be described as issues between parties which have their places of business in different countries. For example, a foreign bauxite company and the government of Jamaica, because their places of business are in two different countries, it would be considered an international arbitration and subject to slightly more different rules than domestic arbitrations. Okay, so now we're rolling on quite happily with our arbitration. The hearing itself will take place, and according to the agreement of the parties expressed in the record of the preliminary meeting, everything will proceed accordingly. The hearing, of course, is where, for those who are not acquainted with that particular expression, by the way, somebody asked me the other day, is if a deaf man attends court, is that called a hearing? So I beg your pardon, I digress. Sorry about that. Also, the arbitrator will have satisfied himself as to the correctness of all matters prior to the hearing. He or she will then outline in general terms how the hearing is to be conducted, matters dealing with evidence, witnesses, record keeping, most importantly, when refreshments will be served. But the arbitrator, joking apart, must at all times keep a firm hold on the proceedings, as I said just now, and to the best of his ability see that equality prevails in terms of whatever takes place, and that the time schedules are obeyed. All right, moving right along, as they say, after presentation of all the evidence by both sides has been completed, they will each deliver their closing addresses, very much like in the courthouse. That could be oral or written, depending on what they agree on. This will be a summation of the main arguments for and against the other side, and a restatement of why their case should succeed and the opponents should fail, and how they believe the arbitrator should deal with costs in the award. The arbitrator will then ask if there are any other matters left undealt with. He'll thank everybody present and then close the hearing. His or her, to be gender correct, his or her final act will be, after reviewing and considering all the evidence and arguments put forward by both sides, make a decision based on their assessment of all aspects of the process and make an award. That will be in precise and specific terms, which, and this is a very important point, terms of which must be capable of immediate enforcement. On that note, an arbitration award can be enforced in the same way as a judgment debt of the Supreme Court. And finally, although not required by the present law, I'm hoping it will be in the new law, if ever we get it, the arbitrator is advised to conclude the terms of the award by giving reasons for making their decisions. Very important, so that when the award is handed down, obviously somebody's got to win, somebody's got to lose, and so on. But it's important for everyone to understand how the arbitrator arrived at his decision. Was it correct? Was it based on the facts as presented to him? Does it conform to the current legislation? So on and so forth. So that's basically, I know you must have 10 million questions, but I'm asking you if you could keep them until the end, and I'll answer all at once, if not simultaneously. Now, I said earlier, just one moment. Thank you. Okay. Oh, that feels better. Now, there are, as I mentioned earlier, there are other forms of alternate dispute resolution. Although arbitration is the flavor of the month, so to speak, there are others. which are different from the court system. And we are now, the point I should make is that arbitration is a method of settling commercial disputes. Why do I say commercial? It is because we cannot deal with not necessarily. Well, we could actually, yes, we could deal with domestic disputes if the two parties to the dispute, perhaps whether they are wife and husband or some other combination. But the point I was going to make was that we can only restrict our activities to commercial disputes as opposed to criminal activities. Criminals can't go to arbitration, in other words, no matter how much you would prefer to. So, my apologies. Now, but there are, as I said, many other forms of ADR, which is settling disputes, and all of them are based on the same principle, and that is of recognizing the facts, if not the details of their dispute, a willingness to settle and abide by the result of their process. In the event of the ADR process, because it is voluntary and consensual, fails to arrive at a settlement, it may be referred to the court for settlement. But that is only in extreme cases. So allow me, ladies and gentlemen, to deal with the first and probably the most widely used alternative, which is mediation. As with arbitration, mediation provides both parties with an opportunity to agree on a single mediator. Anybody can be appointed as a mediator, who will then proceed to call the parties together and I lost my train of thought for a moment. Because I was really thinking about the Dispute Resolution Foundation, which I'm sure many of the members here today are aware of, but the DRF has been the main body that has been dealing with mediations. And as I said before, there are rules of the game which apply to mediation as well as arbitration. And these basically are founded on the Supreme Court's civil procedure rule number 74. And if I could just read to you briefly what that says about mediation, what it is. It is a dispute resolving process in which a neutral third party, called a mediator, facilitates and coordinates negotiations by the parties in a dispute with a view to resolving or reducing the extent of the dispute. And Part 74 of the Civil Procedure Rules goes on to say tell us what the objectives of arbitration are. It improves the pace of litigation. And what does that mean? That means that the tremendous caseload presently in the court system in Jamaica, which is, as we all know, clogging up the system, can be, by order of the court, certain cases can be referred, instead of being heard by the court, referred to mediation in accordance with Rule 74. It promotes early and fair resolution of disputes. That speaks for itself, I think. It certainly reduces the cost of litigation to the parties. In other words, it's much cheaper and more, in most cases, more efficient than going to the court. It improves access to justice. In other words, justice denied, quoting the cliche, justice delayed, rather, is justice denied. And so on. So the mediator's role is to help monitor the communication between the parties. The monitor doesn't act as an advisor or a counselor or any advisory role of that kind. He or she has to make sure what is being said is clarified and understood by both parties. At the center of mediation is informed consent, so that when they come to the table with some understanding of how mediation works, and they are willing to cooperate and give it a try. So in other words, the will of the parties in mediation is just as important as the act of the mediators themselves. It is important for the parties to trust the integrity and impartiality of the mediator. He or she must ensure that the negotiation sessions are private and confidential, and there's no need for any minutes or notes to be kept, and because any notes made by the mediator are personal to them, unlike a judge in chambers, which is different, and may not be demanded to be produced in any further actions, again unlike a judge in the Supreme Court or any court. Neither can, in the case of failure to come to any settlement, the mediator be a witness in future arbitration or litigation. A very important point, which has lots of ramifications, which if we have time we can go into later. But the important thing is that the mediator cannot be, if the mediation fails, he cannot be called as a witness or even disclose any of the information he has received due to the total confidence of the parties. Well, so much for mediation. There's another method of settling disputes called conciliation. Although it's an accepted form of ADR, it's not really a system. At least not as far as I can see anyway. And it's not very popular here in Jamaica, but I mention it just to give you an idea of what alternatives consist of. What it does, it involves a more formal experience than mediation in calling for the parties to reconcile their entrenched positions in the dispute in order to arrive at an agreed settlement. The process, the main advantage of which is total privacy, is usually conducted by attorneys, resulting in a largely more expensive cost to the parties than other forms of ADR. Another form of ADR, since, as I said, there are more than one, is a system not too much used here, but it's used quite widely abroad. It's a system usually restricted to disputes of highly technical or scientific nature, where the core of a dispute is exclusively concerning a particular industrial or commercial process or system knowledge of which is not in the public domain. Such cases will involve the appointment of an expert or a specialist representing the arguments of a party with an agreement on a third and equally qualified person acting as an umpire, whose adjudication will be accepted as final by the parties. Going on to another form, used in the United States. I've never seen it used in Jamaica. But it's disputes where the core issue, that is the issue on which the whole dispute depends, is an interpretation of specific points of law. And it's used by the parties as a more economical method of assessing a party's chances of success or otherwise in a costly legal action. Here, an accepted legal authority, usually a retired judge, will hear arguments of the attorneys of both sides and give his or her opinion of who will succeed or fail should the issue ultimately go to court. Then, just to give one more of two last examples, Med-Arb. It's a hybrid form of resolving or reducing the number of individual items in a dispute. Now, normally, an arbitrator is strictly bound, in order to be impartial, not to use his or her technical or legal knowledge to influence the progress of evidence that's being presented. But in this form of settlement, they are, with the prior consent of both parties to the dispute, allowed to intervene to influence the parties to come to some kind of resolution. I almost said revolution, forgive me. Or to break a deadlock preventing progress. In my experience, especially in the case of non-complex issue, it's a handy and judicious way to convince the parties that hardly ever is a party in a dispute 100% right and the other party 100% wrong. Okay, that leads me to one of my favorite forms of, especially in the construction industry, forms of dispute resolution, which is called adjudication. Now, earlier today we heard under contract administration, we heard, and I must compliment Mr. Donald Moore on his brilliant presentation, which included reference to FIDIC. I'm not sure if everybody understands what FIDIC means. It's not a bad word, but it is an acronym standing for an International Civil Engineering Contract, which we do use in Jamaica. And the NHT seems to have a predilection for it. Let me say, in the past, parties to commercial disputes in the construction industry, because of the standard arbitration clause in most local contracts, and here I say local contracts because away from FIDIC and certain government contracts, all of our private commercial contracts usually are based on the standard CIC, Construction Industry Council standard form of contract. But in those contracts, the contractor has to wait until completion of the work for those disputes to be dealt with. Now, I maintain that in an era of high interest rates and lengthy contract periods, this proves onerous to both employers, and contractors. Then the industry realized that a new and relevant system was needed. This was found some years ago, by the way, in the UK as a formalized version of the well-established FIDIC standard dispute management system of what Mr. Moore referred to as DRBs. DRB stands for Dispute Review Boards, or you can have a DAB, which is a Dispute Adjudication Board, which is usually used for civil engineering contracts as opposed to building. So what emerged was that adjudication, and where both parties to an agreement, preferably prior to the beginning of a contract, but it could be at any time thereafter, agreed to an individual who from the beginning has the contractual power to receive, hear, and settle disputes as and when they arise during the course of the project. She or he will then issue a decision to which both parties must conform until the end of construction. Then, if one party is still aggrieved, it may be arbitrated. What has been found is that once experience, but mainly in the UK, not so much in Jamaica, has proved that settling individual issues as and when they occur, effectively nipping them in the bud, as you might say, they then cease to become exacerbated and blossom into full-scale disputes. A strict requirement now, not a choice, but a requirement for adjudication is now contained in most UK and international construction contracts. For example, World Bank, Inter-American Development Bank, Caribbean Development Bank. And, Mr. President and members, ladies and gentlemen, I strongly suggest that we in the industry seriously consider proposing that its use is mandatory in Jamaica. The savings in time, energy, and cost will be enormous. That is all I wish to say at the moment about adjudication. Commercial break. Well, ladies and gentlemen, all that we've discussed so far, and probably most of the day, has been a look at some of the various methods of settling disputes in the industry after they have become disputes. And as I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, I would like to share with you now a personal view on this matter. And that is that my observation of conflict in our industry over the many years I've been in practice in Jamaica has been that avoidance is by far preferable to conflict or dispute settlement. Or, if you'll allow me to quote an allegorical story of this doctor in rural India who for years was trying to find a cheap, acceptable method of birth control. And when his female patients came to seek his advice, he would say, "It was very simple, my dear. All you do is drink half a glass of warm water." And they would say, "Oh, you mean, doctor, before or after?" And he would reply, no, instead. So that illustrates what I meant by prevention is far better than cure. But put into realistic terms, roughly 80% of the arbitration cases I've dealt with concern disputes of, and I'm sure these expressions are familiar to most practitioners in this room, extensions of time, variations, measurements and quantities, imperfect relationships between the various members of the so-called team. That's what Ray McIntyre was talking about quite rightly earlier. Late or non-payments and so on, all of which I'm sure are familiar to those here today, and most of which could have been avoided if the projects were fully designed, costed, time-planned and correctly financed prior to commencement of the project.
Hear, hear.
But ladies and gentlemen, supposing there was a system that went a long way in avoiding most, if not all, of the disputes that presently plague us in our industry. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Well, I'm happy to report there is. There is such a system. It's a system that was developed, again, in the UK, and has spread to US and to Europe, and it is called Building Information Modeling. And everybody refers to it as BIM for short. Building Information Modeling. Okay, what it is. Basically, it is a virtual, digitally constructed representational model of the intended structure incorporating all aspects of the design, management, life cycle costings, all types of other costs and inputs constructed within a framework of all participants in the construction project process, such as architect, engineers, mechanical, electrical, QSs, IT experts, interior designers, anybody else who has an input into the creation and success of a structure. It needn't necessarily be a building. It could be a bridge or a highway or anything. But the principle is that the BIM may sound like a revolutionary idea, but it has been successfully used in the UK for several years and demands initial involvement and group discipline. An important point, that group discipline, which I suppose also includes the question of group respect for one another, architect, engineer, QS, so on, of all participants. What it is basically, it is a computer program that has to be, or the inputs of which will three-dimensionally show all components of the building, including architecture, structure, engineering, and interiors, social services, and so on, all separately identified, which can be shown in 3D and analyzed on their own, on a computer screen, obviously, or collectively. And at this virtual stage, it will show up many of the coordination problems usually encountered and can be corrected digitally, pre-contract, instead of, as in the past, on the site, creating variations and confusion. And it has been very successful in its use. to such an extent that as long ago as May 2011 in the UK, the UK government stipulated that by 2016, which is next year, almost ready, all centrally procured public projects should be planned using BIM. The European Union, in a public pronouncement directive, followed suit, and in March of this year, 2015, recommended its use. I could go on about this new method of BIM. It's a bit complicated. It will take a lot of study, it will take a lot of research, but in the long run, and hopefully with the impetus of the IMJ, we can see its development in Jamaica. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that probably sums up more or less what I'd intended to communicate to you this evening.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Can I ask you to give Mr. Patrick Gordon, our MC for today, a rousing round of applause, please? Well done, sir. Just to say that we have been given a recommendation for those of you who were here today because you wanted to qualify for some additional hours of continuing professional development. The recommendation is that we use 5.5 hours, and we're going to go with that 5.5 hours towards your professional development credentializing. So please, we will be communicating that in our certificate going forward. Okay, Mr. Stoppy, we don't think that this will require any arbitration, adjudication, or anything, or BIM, right, or mediation. So we're going to ask you to draw the winner of the ticket for two to the Carib Cinema. So you can just take out your numbers just to see if somehow it corresponds with what is going to be drawn. I'll read the number. It's 34. Number 34. Not here. You're very quick on the mark with that one. You sure? Well, okay. The only adjudication or arbitration or, what's the third one again? Mediation that might arise is if there's any conflict or dispute about who you're taking to the cinema with you. So please come forward, sir, if you have a 34. You have 34, sir? Please come forward, sir. Please come forward. Thank you so much, Mr. Stoppy, for the first act of conflict-free resolution. It wasn't originally. There's no conflict. There's no resolution. Congrats, sir. Glad to see you. 34. Gordon. Okay. Yeah. It's Gordon. Congratulations. All right. Just make sure the number. I've been asked to make sure the number is 34. It is 34.
Congrats.
No, I thought I was just in between. The last one, I think, which is one of some note and worthy of serious consideration, is a manicure, pedicure, body cure. No, it's called a full body massage, actually. So it's a mani-pedi facial. It's a mani-pedi facial full body massage. No, man, I'm trouble free on this one. So please, could I ask Mr. Stoppy again to dip in and see if we can allow someone to benefit from these four rather low stress or leisurely activities that I'm sure you want to be a part of.
What's that?
It begins with a 1. That hiss was very loud, brethren. It continues with a 1. Those hisses were very loud. And it ends with a 3. It's 113. Do we have a winner? 113?
113.
The gentleman is very cool, very calm. Please come forward, sir. So that's the winner for our last prize this afternoon. And I just want to say that this is compliments of Jen Care Skin Farm. So you know that this is a very high quality spa. So it's really, I am sure that you will be enjoying this, sir. The matter of who we will give it to.
Yes.
Imagine no more for because you're accused enough.
Yes, to go resolve the dispute.
Before. Congrats, my brother. Look at it. All right.
Thank you very much.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it just left for me to just say a very hearty thank you and safe travels. And really, today has been a very great day. I think we have been, fed and we have been watered and we have been nourished and nurtured. Want to just say a big thank you for all those who especially came from out of town, and those who have been here for the first time. Next year we are going to be back here again. It's an annual seminar. It is the IMH's annual event, and we look forward to seeing you here next year again. All the best. Godspeed. Thank you again.